Good evening. Welcome to the January 9th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alrighty, so we do have some opening announcements. Trustee Herrera, you want to get us started?
Yes. Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So just my weekly reminder, the Ossining Emergency Shelter Program is going pretty strong this week. Our average is so far 10 per night. If you are a Ossining guest, a resident, or someone who's just here and you need shelter, we do not want you sleeping or freezing on our streets. So we do have a program that's brought to you by the Ossining, Bedford, and Bedford, and Mount Kisco Emergency Shelter Partnership Program. And all you have to do is go to Open Door at 9 o'clock, and a staff member will meet you where you will be escorted with a big group, either to a local nearby church or place of worship or a venue that's hosting. You get a warm meal, sometimes depending where you're at, entertainment for the night, and then you get a warm breakfast and a couple of options in the morning. So it's 9 o'clock in front of Open Door. That leads me to my next announcement. This is actually pretty exciting. I've always had the question, and it's been asked to me now that we have the shelter, Omar, how do we know how many actual homeless people we have in our community, and how does the county know? So I have registered myself, and I'm looking for a team to join me in the Westchester County Continuum of Care, which is a partnership for homeless in our community. They're seeking volunteers to help count the homelessness in Westchester County, including right here in Ossining. And all volunteers will be trained in special training in the county, and they'll be assigned to a geographic area. I'm going to request, obviously, Ossining. Um, and they're going to partner with professional outreach workers and law enforcement from all levels. And the volunteers are actually going to be a pretty integral part to understanding and getting knowledge about how our region's going to be addressing increased homelessness in Westchester County and in the Hudson Valley. So there is one catch. You are dealing with a population that has a lot of challenges and that may require a lot of services. So if you do sign up, there is a 90-minute mandatory in-person training before we go out that evening for a count. I'm assuming it's going to be in the evening. Anyone's, if you're able to walk, speak, and self-motivated, 18 years or older, please shoot me an email, and that is going to be on January 24th. So any questions on how to be part of that countywide count and Ossining's first homeless count, please mark that count, that date down, and just shoot me an email, Herrera, Herrera, at villageofossining.org. Thank you.
Trustee, are folks still able to send in an application for the internship program? Have you gotten any
Thank you for,
information?
I have. Thank you, Mary Garrity. So yes, I am still accepting applications for our high school and college internship program. It's really a great opportunity for those who want to get an inside look on how government works at the municipal level. All you have to do is submit either a cover letter, resume, and or a 30-second video introduction. So that's open to anyone, and preferably we are looking for students and applicants who are doing it for credit or for some sort of academic, reason per se. And I'm excited, hopefully, to work with our village manager once we get up to at least 6 applicants. We have 2 so far. My goal is to at least get 6 that actually want to do this, and then we could hopefully pick 1 or 2. So, thank you.
Great. Any announcements, Trustee Manuel Quesada? No. Okay, great. I trust that our other trustees will be joining us, but since we have a quorum, we'll get started. I have a few remarks, and then we have quite a hefty agenda. First, I want to say thank you to anyone who reached out with expressions of concern. I did acknowledge in my Monday email there was a minor medical concern that I was having addressed this week, and I'm very pleased. No cancer, no tumors, no surgery, maybe some dietary changes. I thought I had a pretty healthy diet to begin with, but I'm expected to live a long, healthy, and comfortable life. So thank you for all of your support. And that leads me right into inviting folks to next week's documentary discussion series screening, which is called Heal. And the premise of the film is that we have great strength within ourselves to heal ourselves more than we probably realize. As always, it is free to the public. It starts at 6:30 p.m. at the Ossining Public Library in the Boudars Theater. Again, that is January 17th, next Thursday, 6:30 at the Ossining Public Library. I will make a brief comment about something that has been mentioned in social media. We've received a few emails about it related to a property on Washington Street. I won't get into a lot of detail. There's been some information out there that is concerning, and some folks are concerned. And I'll just say that I've reached out to Sean Pica, who is the executive director of Hudson Link. Hudson Link is a program that you may or may not be familiar with. It is based here in Ossining. It is dedicated to higher education for incarcerated individuals. It began at Sing Sing, but now exists in, I believe, a half a dozen facilities throughout the region. And they've purchased a property on Washington Street where they plan to have up to 5 residents who are Hudson Link, either Hudson Link graduates or currently matriculating college students seeking their bachelor's or master's degree. It was interesting for me to learn more about what their intentions are. I also reached out to Ray Sanchez in hopes that Ray and Sean could have a meeting because I'm sure that the school district is getting some calls as well, because the location that's intended is right near Park School. So it raises some questions and concerns. And so it's important to get as much accurate information exchanged between the leaders of those organizations as possible. So hopefully there'll be some helpful information coming forward and getting the right folks in the room together so that everybody can be on the same page. Also, this is a big agenda. It's our first work session of the year, and we are laying out a lot of items here. There's no surprise of where I stand on issues. I was pretty forthright in the campaign, as were Rika and Manny, and so I'm really excited to move forward this year. One of the things that I spoke about in my inaugural address and referenced last week in opening remarks was to focus on the housing needs assessment, the goal of which is to have greater equality for everyone in our community, in every neighborhood, through a holistic approach to economic development, housing, and so many other parts of our community that are necessary for everyone for having greater equity. And I am looking forward to moving that forward. We are going to have our first discussion of Local Law 1 this year, which is leases for everyone, regardless of the size or age of your apartment. And then at the end, we will talk about a resolution for a public hearing related to ETPA, which was passed last year. And it may not be the best way to address our housing crisis. So that is a lot going on this week and this year. So, Rika, you didn't have a chance. Would you like to offer any opening announcements?
No, thank you.
Trustee Bazemore? All right, then with that, Madam Manager or Corporation Counsel?
Yes, well, thank you. It's going to be Corporation Counsel for the first couple of items, but first up is the Ed and William Baker discussion. I'll turn it over to Stuart to talk about where we are with a potential change of zoning.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate it. Members of the board, we have tonight for work session discussion a proposed zoning map change by Edward and William Baker. They have the property on Croton Avenue, which is currently zoned for MF2. They are seeking a change to the NC2 zone. This application was referred by this board to the planning board for its recommendation. On December 18th, the planning board issued its signed recommendation and did recommend the proposed map change from MF2 to NC2. Briefly, the prior project that had been proposed by William and Edward Baker had received site plan approval from the planning board, but the requested variances were denied by the Zoning Board of Appeals. So they have then come now to request a zoning map change. Mr. Stargiotti, who is the attorney for Edward and William Baker, is here. So he's here to, if the board has any questions, it would be my recommendation to have a resolution next week calling for a public hearing, as is required by our code, with regard to the proposed map change, with that hearing to be held on the 6th of February. But I do have Mr. Stargiotti here, as well as his clients, if there are any questions from board members with the specifics relating to the zoning text change, or zoning map change, to be precise.
Thank you.
Yes.
Please, welcome, Mr. Stargiotti.
Security, members of the board, Mr. Kahan, Ms. McDonald, thank you for entertaining our application tonight. In September, if you don't mind, I'm going to move that a little bit. In September, I submitted a written application that lays forth, I think, pretty clearly the history of my client's application to develop the site, and it was referred to the planning board, and as Mr. Kahan said, they've given a positive recommendation to approve the application, and in their resolution, they recite again some of the history of the development application. So at this point, I can go through it with you, but I know you have a lot to do. If you have any questions for me, or my clients are here as well, we're prepared to answer any questions you have. And yes, we are going to be asking you to set it down for a public hearing. I understand that would have to happen next week. You would schedule it for a later date, but that's what we're asking for.
I'm fine with calling for a public hearing. Is there anything more that we should know about this? I mean, we've discussed it, but it was a different board. I don't know if Trustee Quesada has more questions because he wasn't here for the previous discussions about it.
Would you like me to review it for you? Just briefly, I can do it quickly.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
So this is the vacant lot on Croton Avenue, in between a rather large residential development, and to the far side, as you go up Croton Avenue on the right, is the Jiffy Lube. So it's a vacant lot there. It looks like it probably was once a house or something. There's some stairs coming up, and it's grass. It's a vacant lot on this side of Croton Avenue as you head up that way. My clients have owned it since the early 80s. It was rezoned in 2009 as part of the, it was zoned originally when they bought it as a commercial property, vacant, but as a commercially zoned property. It was rezoned in 2009 by the village board as a result of a comprehensive rezoning project that went on here then to MF2. The immediate adjacent zone, the Jiffy Lube and all of the properties to the further north, are all in the NC2, thank you. And we're asking to be put into that zone. The primary reason is because the MF2 zone, which allows for residential development, multifamily residential development, requires a 40,000 square foot lot. This lot is only slightly over 17,000 square feet. So right from the get-go, you can't build anything on it unless you get some relief from the zoning board or perhaps from this board as a result of the zoning map change. It's too small, it's too narrow. They did go through an entire process of planning and got to the point where the planning board was ready to approve, and they needed to go through that to get to the point where the planning board was ready to approve a project for a multifamily building before they could go to the zoning board. They got to that point. We went through SECRA, and there was a negative declaration. They declared there were going to be no significant negative environmental impacts. That was the planning board as lead agency. We went to the zoning board, went through a long extended process, many meetings with the zoning board. Ultimately, though, they denied the application. So at this moment, my clients have an undersized lot in a zone that requires building as residential, but they can't build anything on it because it's too small and they've been denied variances. So they're in a quandary as to what to do. They have no building rights at the moment on that property. If this board were to grant this application, this parcel would be annexed into the NC2 zone. It meets the size requirements. They can build on the lot without a variance, but they have to build what is permitted by the NC2 zone, which is primarily various types of commercial properties, but also with a residential component could be part of it, not on the first floor. It has to be on the second floor. They would still have to go through the planning process to get a site plan approval. So that's what we're asking to do, put us into a more appropriate zone for the size and location of this lot than the MF2 zone, just scooch it over one zone into the NC2 zone. That's what we're asking for.
Please.
Thank you. And I apologize if the rest of the board, when you first submit this application to the BOT, originally, did you send a site plan so they can actually
see what you guys were proposing? Because sometimes by reading, you don't seem to understand as a
My-
graphic, so to speak. So I'm not sure if you did or not. I'm just
No,
asking the question.
we didn't. My clients developed a site plan for a residential building that would not be permitted in this zone.
I totally understand that.
So,
But what
at this
you're
moment,
asking here right now is the change of zone. So to me, it would be helpful, at least in my end. I'm not sure if the rest of the board feels the same, but to me, it'd be helpful to see the site plan in relationship to what you're asking. The other question that I have is probably more towards Stu, is that let's say if the board goes forward making this change, as you mentioned, it will have a different component on the ground floor. Sure, it has to be commercial. So I'm familiar with the site. So does commercial, do you have an access to the commercial spaces that are going to be, because it's going to be pretty much, it's an, I don't want to say it's an infill lot, but it seems like it's between, doesn't have a front. Um, the, you will have to, what is you, to me, without looking at a site plan, to me, because it was approved already by the planning board, I'm sure there's some sort of easement somewhere. How do you enter the site on this
the
particular
lot
case?
the lot fronts on Croton Avenue. It has a full width of frontage on Croton Avenue. It's not what is presently required by the code. It's not that wide. It's
Understand that. So right now in Cronin Avenue is an access, is a driveway show for the other properties.
Yes.
Are you going to be sharing the same access point?
no, there will not be a shared driveway. There's frontage. There's a relatively low retaining wall, and then the
Right.
lot slopes up. There's going to be some site work. Has to go through a planning process to develop the right project.
Is
But as
that
far
going to be
as
the only access to the commercial part? Because I'm sure you're going to be building it in the back of that. Sure, between the
No,
we have
the-
the ambulance corps and we have the residential part. That's part of your site behind those areas. Sure.
no, this is a small lot. Those areas are separate from this lot. This lot, for example, the zone calls for a front yard setback of no more than 15 feet. The buildings are supposed to be built up near the street. That's where a building is. They don't even know what building they're going to build yet. They haven't gotten to that point yet because they don't know if they're going to be in this zone. So they're going to build a building, though, that complies with the zoning requirements, which in this case requires a building closer to the street than 15 feet. So there'll be a street frontage. If there are parking requirements, they're going to have to meet them. If there's certainly going to be drainage requirements, they're going to have to meet them. They're going to have to meet all of the requirements of the code depending on the building that they build. The residential component upstairs is permitted, but they are not necessarily going to build a building with a residential component. They might. It depends on if they get put into the zone, then they'll study the code and figure out which is the most appropriate and feasible type of building and use to go on the lot.
So there's no design yet for what you might build,
Correct.
but right now with the existing zone, there's nothing that could be built.
Correct.
So you'd like us to scoop out that part of the MF2 zone and make that an NC2 zone, which is what's in the adjacent property. And if that happens, then the property owners will design something that is in compliance with the new zone if we permit that. And
Correct.
this is a public hearing to have the public come and comment on what that might mean, and then after the public hearing, we can close it and the board can decide if we want to change the zoning. But we're certainly not guaranteeing that they're going to get
of
approved
course.
for whatever their site plan is, because that hasn't even been conceived
There's
yet.
going to be a whole other process with the planning board for
Okay.
that. It was the early 80s. I don't know if it was 82, 83.
We bought it in a partnership in '82,
We
and we took over.
They bought it as a partnership with another partner in 1982, and they bought that partner out in 1986.
Is there any way that you can send us at least a site plan? I would like to see the boundaries of.
I can
this.
I can
What's
You
send
don't
the
you.
have to, no, there is a site plan. You have a survey.
Well,
there's
we have a survey. We have a
all
survey.
I
So
wanna
a site
That's
plan
all I want to
involves
see.
a site plan involves a is
I want to see the survey.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem.
All right, great. Thank you.
Any other questions that I can answer?
Not at this moment, but thank you. I'm just trying to catch up with.
No
this particular
problem.
project.
I'll
I-
submit
I-
through
I
Stuart.
Seen
a
the
survey.
minutes and the zoning board and stuff like that, but again, because it's going to be a sort of a new design, I still need to,
I'll submit a survey through Mr.
Copy.
Kahan, no problem,
Appreciate that. Thank you.
or Ms. McDonald.
Great, thank you. So then you're asking for there to be a call for a public hearing on next week, and then the public hearing will take place February 6th.
That would be correct. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Nothing
Mr.
else. Thank you
Sargenti.
very
Thank
much.
you, Mr.
And,
Baker and Mr. Baker.
Is our attendance required next week for that resolution, or is this going to be a resolution to schedule a public hearing?
That would be it. That's
Doesn't
what
sound
Let me
very
know.
controversial.
Great. Terrific. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Up next, we have a discussion on the planned waterfront special permit for Hidden Cove. Again, I'll turn this over to Stuart for an update on where we are. Conversation with the board.
Thank you. And I know that, Paul, I know you're here tonight, so.
Andy is as well.
And Andy is as well. I can see him hiding back there. Because we have, there have been some subsequent discussions with the applicant's counsel with regard to infrastructure repairs that we were talking about, specifically with regard to water. And I know Debbie was involved with those as well. So I think it might be a good idea to at least bring the board up to date where we are with that.
Please.
Whoever.
I think I'd like Paul Fraioli to go
Okay.
over those details since he worked those out.
Welcome.
That was tall. Good evening, Mayor and Board.
Evening.
Thank you, Manager McDonald, Stewart. So to recap or really pick up where we started to talk about in the last Board of Trustees meeting with regard to Hidden Cove and some of the site plan improvements that are part and parcel with their approval in the Planning Board and for your special use consideration. We met offline a couple of times amongst ourselves, and we had a separate meeting with the developer and their counsel. And what I think Manager McDonald is going to present to you after I speak a little bit tonight is a plan that encapsulates everything that will be installed, which is in the best interest of that area for the site plan. So the quick summary is this: the main three things we look at when we look at a site plan for infrastructure, the water, the sewer, and then the stormwater. The road in this case I don't include because the majority of it is in a non-public right-of-way. It's just going to be an easement to accommodate our infrastructure. So down on that site for stormwater, we're going to have them, as they are required to do with the planning board, and their SWIP, which is Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, something they do under Phase 2 regulations, have a stormwater design and adopt a maintenance agreement so they maintain that. And we'll look for stormwater systems that are focused more on treatment and pre-treatment prior to discharge into the Hudson, and not so much retention because this receiving stream is right there, so there's really no reason to hold it back because you're not going to inundate a collection system within the village that could cause flooding upstream. For the sanitary line, we asked, which they're undertaking right now, that they TV the line, very similar to what we had another developer do on Westerly. And at that point, we would consider what the rehabilitation would be at that point. Right now, early indications are that there's going to be significant lining that the developer will undertake on our sanitary system that's presently underground on North Water Street. That lining will prevent the I&I, or the inflow and infiltration of stormwater into the sanitary line, and vice versa, the discharge of sanitary sewage out into the system. That does not happen now. We don't have any discharges that we're concerned with, but we do have I&I issues with which inevitably inundates the county wastewater treatment facility, and it's always a good thing. And it's also at the behest of the County Department of Environmental Facilities that whenever we have a large project come in like this, we ask for a contribution towards I&I removal from the collection system. And that's what we're doing here. We've been doing that ever since we implemented the Phase 2 regulations, because that I&I removal is something that we committed to. And we have done that on Westerly. We've done that on Highland Avenue with the Avalon development, and we're looking to do it here with this development. So that'll be a nice improvement to our system. And the last piece of the infrastructure puzzle, which is what we have been negotiating over the last, or since the board meeting, was for the potable water. And the Reader's Digest version is we were looking to loop the system if you will, that would provide some redundancy for fire protection, help with the quality of the water because you would have more flow and you would have less stagnant dead ends in the line. And the improvement from an 8-inch line, which exists now on what we call Solitude Lane, which is really an easement of someone's private driveway, to an 8-inch line, which is the minimum that we ask for in our code right now. So we do have an agreement that that loop is going to be put in. However, part of the loop is going to be undertaken by the village, which is what was discussed in our last meeting with the developer. The details of the financing and the same. I want to turn it back over to the manager.
As soon as you said that part, I didn't want to hear. You'll turn it back over to Debbie.
Well,
What's that?
Go ahead, Debbie.
Well, I think that I think that what we're very pleased with is being able to work with the developer to share the cost of replacing that line. There are and there's an agreement where there would be a cost sharing of the cost of the line. They did ask that we didn't really talk about that or debate that in public at this point. And Stuart, I'm not really sure that where we are with that. I'm going to bounce the legal part of that to
We'll
Stuart.
still we're still having those discussions, but since it does involve village infrastructure and village property, we can do that as part of an executive session discussion. I'm happy to
Fine.
do
But we have reached an agreement to work together, and I think that what Paul is saying to you is that it's fair for all parties, and
It doesn't seem consistent with our last agreement with a large developer, which is about 75% the size of this one. But if we're going to discuss an executive, we can discuss it more then.
Any other questions?
thank you.
Otherwise, we have the continuation of the public hearing next week,
Understood.
and that's where we are.
Okay.
I believe I saw Chief Sylvester back there. You're here for a couple of items. Do you want to sit down? The uniform kind of gives away who he is. If the haircut didn't give it away, the uniform does tonight.
There you go.
Stuart, you want to?
Sure. Mayor, we have a few proposed cabaret licenses that are before the board tonight. All of them have been vetted by the building department and police department. All were found to be okay. First is El Manabita Sports Bar at 107 Main Street. In their last license, they were granted Friday through Sunday, 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. I should point out that in this year, they're looking for Monday to Thursday, 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. 11 a.m. is before our code permits, and Friday through Sunday, 11 a.m. to 3 a.m. Although we do allow 3 a.m. under our code, we have generally stuck with a 2 a.m. hour. So I would propose for El Manabita noon to 2 a.m. Well, I would go Monday through Thursday, noon to 11 p.m., which is what they're looking for, and Friday through Sunday, noon to 2 a.m. So that would be consistent with our code, if that's okay with the board, and I can have a resolution ready for next week. Next is Trifecta Cuisine, which is also known as Karma Lounge. And
Talking about that?
you can talk individually if you wish.
Or what would you prefer?
I have, the only thing I can say is there is one application that is here tonight, which was denied last year by the board. So that may warrant some more discussion, although it did get approved. As I said, it was vetted by police and building. I'm happy to do it either way, whichever works for you folks. But as I said, the first one did get approved by both building department and a sign off by the police. The next one, as I mentioned, is Trifecta Cuisine, which is also Karma Lounge. In 2018, they had Thursday through Sunday noon to 2 a.m. And they are basically, actually, I should apologize. In 2018, they had Monday through Sunday, finishing at 2 a.m. They're looking now for simply Thursday through Sunday. I would propose noon to 2 a.m. to Thursday through Sunday, which would be consistent with El Manabita and with other locations that we've granted.
And that also had to sign off police? And
Yes, all of,
We had no objection.
the next one is Sirenita Lounge, which is right here at 12 Croton. This did receive a sign-off from police and building. This license application was denied last year by the board. So this may be something of some discussion with the board tonight, but they have come back for an application, and they are asking to operate their cabaret. I should have it here, I apologize. They just say Thursday to Sunday. They don't put time, but it would be most likely, I would say, noon to 2 a.m. And they're looking for music, and they have a pool table and some other things like that. But again, Sirenita Lounge did not have a license last year, and that was a decision made by the board. Let me just get to the last one, which is the Atlantic Bar, which is also on Croton Avenue. And they did receive a license last year. They are looking for operations on Thursday through Sunday from 5 p.m. to 3:30 a.m. Their past license was was basically the same days, Thursday through Sunday, but 1 p.m. to 2 a.m., so they are shortening their hours. So I would propose for them to be 5 p.m. to 2 a.m., which would be, again, the closing time that's consistent with our code. And if that meets the board's okay, and again, this was approved by both police and building, we can have a resolution prepared for the board next week approving this cabaret license. And the only one, as I said, which was approved, which was vetted by both police and building, but was not determined, was denied last year, is Sirenita Lounge. So whether the board wants to have further discussion on that, I'll open that up.
Somebody remind us why we denied it last year.
It wasn't my objection.
Oh, it was. I think it was myself, one trustee Bazemore, and former deputy mayor Codman, or was it trustee Levin? So yeah, so I received a couple of allegations regarding the place for some illicit activity, and I wasn't sure if it was alleged or not. But I'm assuming the police department did their due diligence, so I'll respect that. I'm pretty sure, because I walk a lot and I live right around the corner, that they had a DJ this past year when they had no license. But you know, that's just me. But besides that, if our departments who enforce and are the ones that ultimately the ones that have to respond are fine with it, I'm fine with it too.
When I read Karma Lounge, yes, sorry, thanks. If I recall, when I read Karma and went through the paperwork, there seems to be a letter that was necessary from the owner, not just a business person, validating, and that letter wasn't in the file that I could find.
I believe we did get that letter because I remember that my paralegal had requested it. That's the letter.
I saw
from the
that letter
building.
of request. I just didn't see the letter that
We'll
arrived,
double check that it has come in.
because I think that's one of the issues with so many names to so many of these businesses. Not that it's illegal, it's just hard to follow sometimes.
No, it's just a letter.
And who the owners
from the
are, yeah.
Well, the building owner is good. I will double check
Yeah, the
that.
building owner.
Sure.
Do you
I'll
have
double-
the paperwork here, or should I be looking it up, or?
No, I'd have to go back. It's not within here. I'd have to go check if it may be in a separate file in my office on my
Oh,
computer.
okay. That was my only recollection of something when I went through it that was missing.
Okay, I can check that.
Well, and the rest, just for my own commentary, I think consistency of 2 a.m. is very logical, and I think it's the right way to go across all the establishments, and I think it's easier to manage and control, and you don't have people trolling from one place to the other. One closes, they go to the next. I mean, I also think it's fair to the owners of the businesses that they're all have the same type of hours and get basically almost what they asked for. So I'm good with all the recommendations, personally.
I will check on that the letter has come in from Karma Lounge. Otherwise, with the board's okay, I'll just prepare the necessary resolutions for next week. So that's going to all get approved. Thank you.
Okay. Chief Sylvester, thank you for joining us. Next up is a discussion of how we might best establish a subcommittee to review the Civilian Police Complaint Review Board as it currently is and how it can be more effective going forward. Thank you, Stuart, for sending us a copy of the existing code. It must have been some time. I don't know if I've ever read this in its entirety. Certainly not with the perspective that I have now that it hasn't been terribly active in recent years. Although I'm coming to realize that it has met sometimes. I just haven't been aware of it. So I think all of those are indications that we could be more effective. So I open it up to anybody who wants to either comment on the code as it is existing or any thoughts on how we might effectively move forward.
I was thinking for the board's sake and also the public's sake, because we haven't really had a chance to really just have an educational moment about what it is and why we have it and what it does, is Stuart, because he's the best, I think, speaker and narrator that we have. Compliment. Can just go
where I can get
can just go over for us kind of like what we see in the charter, not all of it because it's a lot, but the basics so the public could know, what it is, its intent, its purpose. We don't have to go through the definitions unless the board wants to. The selection, appointment, the training, and just how it works in the process, So if someone's watching right now, what is the process, right? Why, how does it go?
Sure.
And then I guess we could just go into if we have any other, right? So.
Sure.
Okay. The Civilian Police Complaint Review Board appears in Chapter 8 of the Village Code. Ossining is one of the very few villages that, in fact, has a Civilian Police Complaint Review Board. Only village. Thank you so much, Chief. And it was established, as Section 8.2, as under both 57-11Q of the Unconsolidated Laws. That is a section of the Unconsolidated Laws that specifically deals with village police departments, and particularly with regard to Westchester, so it's important, and the Municipal Home Rule Law. But it really states it most importantly in the purpose, which is Section 8.3. The Board of Trustees has created a Civilian Police Complaint Review Board comprised of members who will conduct the business of the Civilian Police Complaint Review Board in a comprehensive, fair, and impartial manner. The mission of the Civilian Police Complaint Review Board is to conduct a complete review of police department investigations of complaints filed against police officers. And so it is basically the review mechanism with regard to those particular complaints. There are, if you want to call them civilian members, and there are police department members as well. We've gone through, I'm not going to go through all the criteria for membership. There are, however, training requirements that exist with regard to members of the Civilian Police Complaint Review Board. There is a process for how the complaint is made. The complaint goes in through the police department, and they're reviewed, then the meetings are scheduled. There is a significant role with regard to confidentiality with regard to those complaints that come in. It is, there's, if I can just go here, we'll talk about scope of review. The Civilian Police Complaint Review Board shall review all complaints, except it shall not review cases during an ongoing criminal investigation against a police officer or complainant. It shall not review cases while criminal charges are pending or when a filed civil action is pending. So, for example, if someone were to commence a Section 1983 case against a particular police officer or the department or the village with regard to police action, but that person also files a complaint with regard to the police action, that complaint would be held in abeyance while the civil action runs its course, same as if there were a criminal case proceeding. And then it goes on in Section 812. After a complete review of the police department investigation of a written complaint, the CPCRB shall confer and vote on whether to find the complaint or allegation either substantiated, unsubstantiated, or unfounded. If the board believes that further investigation is required, the chair shall communicate the board's recommendation regarding further investigation to the chief, and then the code goes through what the process is for that. So it's unlike a lot of our other boards and committees these policies and procedures are set forth in the code, exactly what they have to do and how they have to go about performing their particular function. It also talks about the complaint process itself, that the complaints are to be in writing. They should be signed by the complainant. They are available at various locations, certainly through the police. They are to be available in English and Spanish. And additionally, and really most importantly, and perhaps something we may want to talk about, the chief and the CPCRB are supposed to issue an annual report. We do require that of some of our other boards. EAC is a prime example. And one of the points of the annual report is to indicate the number of complaints that have been received, number of complaints that were substantiated or unsubstantiated or unfounded, a breakdown of the type of complaints, a breakdown of which complaints were substantiated and why, whether there was a difference between the recommendation of the chief versus the CPCRB, and compare statistics. So and that annual report will allow the board to know, and the public, because it becomes that document, as to exactly what's going on. And that's sort of in a nutshell what the Civilian Police Complaint Review Board chapter of the code provides. It does have, as I said, rigorous training, in many ways much more rigorous than we have for our other boards in terms of what has to be done and what's required. And it's one of the few boards that has as members village employees, in this case, police officers, which again is different from any other board that we have. And the appointment process is different. The chief has certain appointment authority. This board also has certain appointment authority. In the past, there used to be a separate board that would also make its own recommendations for appointment. I think we basically put everything now with the Board of Trustees, with the exception of those appointments that rest with the chief.
So, comments, thoughts, how to proceed so that it's a more effective board and meeting more regularly. And one of the requirements is that they meet at least monthly, which we know hasn't been happening, but that's a pretty black and white thing that can happen if it hasn't been. What other things stood out to people that either you want to, I mean, we don't have to create a subcommittee. If we say, you know what, this is great as it is, let's just appoint some people and have it move forward and, go with what we've got here. Or is it worth having another conversation and delving into it more deeply with members, either that have been members, that are interested in being members of the police department, members of the village board? I'm flexible. I'm open to what we do next.
I think, part of the village board and the police department having such a great year when it comes to just how we operate, just one of the things that kind of stuck through, we kind of lost it. And my understanding is there hasn't been a need for it this past year. Correct me if I'm wrong when whenever you want to.
So no, that's not the case. What I can tell you is that the board did meet. They did dispose of certain complaints. The majority of the complaints, I don't have statistics because I wasn't sure what the board wanted tonight, but there are several complaints that have been pending for quite some time for the reason that the complainants are, how do we phrase this properly, serial litigators. They'll drop lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, some of them for years on end, all relating to the same set of facts. Some of their cases drag on for years. And based on the code, we can't address those while civil litigation is pending. Some of them are based on lengthy criminal trials that are still hanging out there. So the ones that are hanging out aren't because the board hasn't addressed them. The ones that are hanging out there are because of our inability to address them right now. There's at least one complaint that came in like the last week or second week of December. That one will be heard next week when the board meets. But for some time, we only had 3 civilian members on the board. We had added a 4th. We still have a vacancy for the 5th plus an alternate. So those need to be filled, and that helps us to be able to have a meeting. Because the other thing when you're shorthanded and you call folks to try and coordinate everyone's schedules, we have to be able to do it at night. So that limits what everybody's available to. Most of them have day jobs, but it's not undoable. The other complication to running the CCRB, and it doesn't make it unworkable, but when you look down the list of training topics, now when we added 1 person this year, we were fortunate to be able to have private lessons where we can blast through things relatively quickly. When you add 2 or more people, or you're going back and reviewing with the board as a whole, there's probably 12 or 16 hours of training in there. And if you consider that most people intend to come in for an hour or 2 hours for a meeting, it could be weeks and months before those trainings are completed, unless people are really dedicated to the program where they're willing to come in, a few times a week and every week for a month or so. So it is it is complicated to get somebody on the board, and I think that's the biggest struggle that the CPCRB has going forward, is finding people that are willing to go through all of that training and then remain current in terms of making a certain number of meetings and making themselves available. Other than that, the folks that are there, you know, they were there when I got there, so they've certainly been there for quite some time. I find them to be very fair. There's a real range of personalities there, from those that I think tend to favor cops to those that I think really tend to expect the worst with every complaint. And in the end, we wear body cameras. There's not a whole lot to debate when it goes in there, so the CPCRB is really relatively easy for the most part. There are occasions where the officers' cameras don't go on, and a lot of times that's because they're not required to in every situation. But you know, really the job here is to watch the video and see what happened. So I do have at least one report where to report it to the board. I didn't find one from last year, so I have to check and see if I can find that, and if that was delivered. It may not have been. But you know, in terms of what comes up, generally whatever the board recommends, we've never, in my knowledge, in the history of the board, I don't think there's ever been a disagreement between the chair of the board and the chief. So that goes back before me. And those would be the cases that would generally be presented to the village board, unless the agreement was that disciplinary action was needed and it needed to be a trial on the charges where there'd be a hearing.
I just have a quick question. Are we doing the trainings in-house now? Because I know there was some at one time.
Years ago, Westchester County ran a civilian police academy. They don't offer that anymore, so we have to do it in-house.
Just to let you know, so what prompted this conversation, and my colleagues, please chime in if I interpret this incorrectly, is that I was a liaison, although I did not take the initiative due to just, you know, it being an oversight in time. But I didn't even know, because I never received any communication. The board never received it. So we got to budget time and appointment time, and we were like, oh, we forgot about this entity. What are they doing? What are they, you know? So I guess that's more of a, just how can we, you know, better move forward? Maybe
so there's a couple
with the chair.
There's a few things in there. I mean, look, I think that certainly the folks that are on that board, in time, as we have the ability to train others, my recommendation would be to train people while these folks sit, and then offer them the opportunity to come off, because I think vacating positions and trying to train leaves you within a board that doesn't have an ability to operate, at least for a short period of time. That said, I don't know. We haven't discussed their feelings on whether they want to stay or go. I think they enjoy what they do. But look, I think that the positions that are open have to be filled. I think it's a valuable conversation to have with folks to say, look, you've served for a long time, and you know, if you've run your course and you'd like to be replaced, this is your opportunity. There's some other stuff in there that I hadn't realized was there. Like I believe we're required to have an annual, like an information session for the public on what the CPCRB does. That's great. We can do that. That's fine. There's a lot of responsibility in there left on the chair. Some of that's handled by my secretary and assistants to them. She oftentimes will make the phone calls on behalf of the chair, just because she's able to coordinate with everybody during business hours. But we should be having one of those sessions, and I think that would help people to better understand what's going on. The only one complaint from the code that I've gotten from the members that sit on the board is they had asked a few times, or they hadn't asked, but they had discussed among themselves a few times, that the terms unfounded, unsubstantiated, and it was unfounded and unsubstantiated, they find to be very similar. And that's one that if we were going to be revisiting, you know, in legal terms, it makes sense, but you know, when you're looking at it from plain language, they had mentioned at least once that that may be something the board might want to review and see if there's maybe something a little bit easier to understand.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
I just when someone submits a complaint, it goes to the police department, I'm assuming your office, and then it gets sent to the board, or is there a vetting process before it's sent to
No,
the CRB?
if you see what's in the code there, it says that what the board does is they review an investigation done by the police department. So Lieutenant Giorgio, if you look at our chain of command that we have published in the building, it says he's in charge of internal affairs. So he, unless there's some conflict of interest, would handle whatever investigation takes place. He delivers his investigation to the board. They review the investigation. They have the opportunity to ask him questions. They have the opportunity to ask for more information. And I can tell you that over the years, prior to body cameras, my understanding is that things were very different, because a lot of those were, you know, say if you had a traffic stop where somebody felt like they were treated unfairly, it's the operator of the vehicle's story and the cop's story, and we might have to go back and talk to them again. In this case, if it's on video,
the screen goes down, the camera goes on, and they watch what happened. It's really relatively simple.
And the forms are only available at the police station? Is that my
No,
understanding?
no. I believe in the code they're the library, the clerk's office, and the police station. And I think IFCA has to have them too. I know I checked with Karen last year. I don't know. I have to check with her now.
Are they in English and Spanish?
I believe so. Yeah. I know we have them in Spanish. I have to make sure everybody else has them.
So I guess my only comment is this was created in 2000, and 19 years later, we're more tech savvy. Um, can it be online, or would the code have to change in order to be online? Is it
So
just
one of the things that restricts you from being able to, you could certainly, our website's in flux. There's some issues there that are for another conversation. But one of the issues with taking complaints online is that the complaints have to be signed and sworn to. One of the things that's really always stuck with the cops is that a civilian complaint review board, while I don't think anybody disagrees that it's a productive thing to have, essentially what you're doing is you're allowing an outside group of people to judge your actions, and your career hangs in the balance. The trade-off there is that folks are required to sign the bottom of that and swear to it, that if they're creating a story and lying, they'd be held accountable as a crime. My understanding years ago when we had one that was a very blatant lie was that at the time, a prior administration, the district attorney's office was unwilling to prosecute that. So in terms of whether or not that really matters, I don't know, but I think that I and most of the job would object to having something submitted that doesn't include that jurat. First, it's in the code that it has to have that, but also I think that's an important thing because I think people have to understand that when you make accusations against people, wherever that may be, there's a heavy burden that comes with that.
Are you done? Yes. So I actually thought the conversation was about creating a subcommittee. When I read the code, I was surprised, having actually been a liaison who also could never make the meetings because I work all day and they had to be, and by the time I found out about them, it just didn't seem to work well. So there are a couple of things just for commentary. Number one, we are the only village that have it. And I've been to a meeting in Mount Vernon about, I think I spoke to you before I went. I didn't realize I was actually invited because people wanted to copy what we have. Like Mount Vernon doesn't really have something like this, and they have a lot of issues. And there were other people from other states. I was sort of taken aback that we were considered like a model for something. I thought I was going to learn what others are doing to make ours better. So I have to say that we're very advanced in this committee, but looking at the overall committees that we've looked at for the last 2 years, this is one that just isn't very active. And so I actually look at it totally sort of from a business point of view. And I know you run your department that way, so you like get this. It's we don't really have to set up a lot of new things like we did with the EAC and we had to do with the ethics committee and really rewrite things because they're actually really detailed. I found it surprising it's actually the chair has a lot of responsibilities. Not you, not your assistant, not anybody else. The chair actually in this particular committee, unlike others, actually has real responsibility. They're the ones that are actually supposed to call the meetings. They're the ones that are supposed to take care of things. So not sure that's been happening. So I think a good idea for the subcommittee is to actually look at the code and maybe have a couple of people on there and just say like a checklist. Are we doing this? Yes, no. Call up the community center or go in there and make sure it's there. It's not really for you to do. It should be a subcommittee should go through this checklist and say, yes, yes, no, we need this, we need these forms. I would argue that they could probably look to Quantel's point for technology and say maybe legally we can't do it, but we've heard that before, and maybe there is a convenient way to do it. DocuSign has a signature capability on it. It's free. It's if you have the technology, I sign contracts all the time on DocuSign with my signature. It's accepted in courts now. I totally get what you're saying. We don't walk around and decide the careers based on our interaction with the bank tellers and with the vice presidents of the banks and how their organization works and have people fired over our say-so. It's a big deal to put complaints in for both parties. But I think the subcommittee could, sorry, I thought I turned this off. I think a subcommittee can go and do a checklist, get more people interested. 3 years ago, we said nobody was interested in any committee. Nobody wants to be on EAC. Nobody. Now we are like up to 61 resumes and 250 something requests because people asked for multiple things. So it's a lot of requests. 3 years ago, we were all sitting around going, nobody wants to do this. It's volunteer. It's a lot of work. We want to have an equitable group. So I think like a two-person subcommittee can help with that and get the right chair who steps up. And I'm not saying the chair now is the wrong chair. I'm simply saying the person who understands it. I'm not sure everybody understands the responsibilities. Look into webinars because that was a big thing. These courses that you have to take. I mean, I don't even think the land use boards have to go through all of this training
I
that
mean,
they
a
have
good
to.
portion
It's
of it's
huge.
local though. So if we had to create a webinar,
Oh,
they
no,
would
if it
watch you
exists.
do
If it doesn't exist, then we have to figure out. And if it requires money or time, then the subcommittee has to say, you know what? Can't afford it, or we can afford it, or it's a time issue, or it's an overtime. I'm just saying I think we need two people to sort of sit down and go, I don't think it's a big deal to go through it. If we think it's important enough. I didn't actually realize this was such a big issue till a couple of weeks ago, in the sense that the committee doesn't seem to meet very much. So, and I think people would be interested in this, but it's got to be a portfolio of the right kind of people so it doesn't turn into people's personal agendas being put through. But all our committees have to have that. We interview people, we make sure that this isn't some personal agenda, that people really fairly and squarely want to do the right thing on behalf of the board or on behalf of the manager and in a helpful way. And I think they should, these two people should also sit down and just put a checklist of, like, you know, the November of each year, these are the metrics 1, 2, 3, based on the code actually says what the metrics. It's like how many complaints, and put some definitions down. So basically, the subcommittee, that all they would be doing is doing exactly what the code already says should be done. Explain it to the right people and put the word out there to see if we can get the right people on this committee. And it sounds like the chair is going to have a lot to do, like lots of work, more than most chairs. That's going to be the big challenge, is getting a chair who wants to do all the work.
I mean, in terms of the work, I'm not sure what everybody's perception of how many complaints we get a year are.
I guess she means like
Tend to be a handful. I understand what you're saying.
No,
No, that I understand, but
Yeah.
that's an upfront difficulty. Once the training's done and we're going to just complaints month to month,
Right.
Some months we have complaints and some months we don't.
Yeah, but,
No,
but this-
agreed.
But you know, I guess we're when we talk about there's so much training that's necessary,
Yeah.
and we haven't been meeting monthly. But what it says about the schedule of meetings is it'll at least meet monthly with at least 24 hours notice of meeting, which I think is really not enough notice. And then, I mean, that's fine to have that as a minimum, but for people to get it on their calendar,
We generally
it should
give
be
them 2
done well in
weeks.
advance. Okay. But then part B of that is, in the absence of any complaints to review, the monthly meeting would be used for continuing education.
Right.
So, especially as we know, we're going to have new people coming on to fill the empty spots, and if some people have been on a long time, maybe they want to move on to another committee, or just make room for another person, since there is thankfully a lot of interest in our community for serving. If the training is happening in-house and they're not meeting every month, then if they met every month, the training could be happening during the meetings, right?
Mhm.
So, and we've got one particular one that's going to be heard sometime in the near future, and thankfully we have enough people that as long as they can all show up, it can happen sometime soon. But then we can be using these monthly meetings to get folks up to speed with, if we make some new appointments. So we have discussed some folks who are interested, and I did follow up with them. The two in particular that we had discussed in our
So-
executive session last week are interested and excited to get involved, whether it's a subcommittee or the full-fledged thing. Do people feel that we need to have a subcommittee?
So I think just given, having a chance to look at the code again, there are no, when I read it, I was like, oh, this is great. So on paper, it's good. So I don't, whatever kind of updates that might need to happen, I think it would be best to appoint the people who are interested, and then maybe they can kind of do their own thing, after they get trained, kind of work out some of those kinks, maybe by looking, at some of the
I think that one of the ways that the board really wants to know what's going on, if you're talking about a subcommittee, the real proper subcommittee to report to the board and let you know what changes need to be made, how to make things more active, things that we're doing, would be me and the chair. And I think that all the things you're talking about with having a checklist and the board wanting to know that all of these things are being done, that's fine. I'm glad to provide a monthly report as far as things outside of the scope of the complaints themselves. And, look, here's what we did. We went around and we touched base with all the businesses that said they were our advocacy groups that are holding our complaints. Here's when we're planning our outreach session for. Here's the training sessions that we have planned for these people. here's the ways we're trying to. I mean, it's really the board's prerogative to recruit new volunteers to sit on the board. But I mean, if you're looking for somebody that's going to go through this and tell you that, I think the best people qualified to do that would be the chair and myself.
Are we up to date on trainings?
I'm sorry?
Are we up to date on trainings for the current members?
Yes.
That's good.
I forgot to mention one thing that really struck me when I read it. So we keep appointing liaisons. I didn't see a role for a liaison in this charter.
Because we
Anyway.
actually have a role as the Board of Police Commissioners.
Right, but not a liaison. We've been assigning liaison, and actually, I would have thought reading it now that it's actually, I wouldn't call it a conflict, but it almost seems like you aren't supposed to have a liaison, and we've been assigning. So that I think you asked me, Stuart, to discuss, or if you did, Omar, about like what struck me. That struck me that we're not supposed to actually have that. It doesn't make any sense to have a liaison, but.
Formally in the charter, it's more.
No, we've just
honorary.
No, but it's in conflict with what it
may not be
says, yeah.
appropriate because
The only difference here, and I've mentioned this before on different things, is that we can't really tell you anything because then when you hear it, you'd have to recuse yourself later. So it leaves you objective.
the Board of Police Commissioners may
Yeah,
have
so
a role.
that jumped out at me that it doesn't make sense once you read this to have one. So that's something we should change. We shouldn't be doing anymore. But anyway,
Brains with just appointing the people who are interested, or
I would gladly appoint two folks, but I would also like to see the list of existing members. I know there's some.
I'm sorry. Are you talking about?
I'm not talking about the subcommittee. I'm talking about the actual.
Montel is actually saying he's not sure we need a subcommittee. I heard
Okay.
him say
He's
that.
not the only one saying that. I think.
No,
I just wanted to
just
follow.
Yes.
following the conversation, Montel clearly said he doesn't think we need a subcommittee.
Do you want to weigh in on this before we make our plan for next week?
Yes. Thank you, Chief. You and I had similar conversations years back about almost pretty much the same. And I agree with you in regards to the sort of like a self-committed going over this. Even the chair is not appointed by the village board; is the chair is selected within the committee itself. So that is something that that to me is important because we don't want to tint any of that information. Can I ask you a quick question though? Who's that? So right now we have a senior and a junior police officer part of this committee itself, because that's what.
So how it was when I came in, as far as the sworn officers, there's one. I think it lists them as a superior officer and a line officer. My interpretation of that, and I guess the way it's always been done, is that one is a supervisor and one of them is a patrol officer. So we also, and the way the code says, it says there's to be an alternate for each group, for the two groups, and I think the two is referencing the civilian side and the sworn side. However, since there's a distinction between the two officers, we've also always had one alternate for each of them. In other words, if you have to have a supervisor and a cop, we've had an alternate supervisor and an alternate cop. So if either one of them couldn't be there, they could replace.
This is more like a general question, and probably to Stu and the rest of the board. I mean, you can weigh in too, Chief, obviously. So we have we passed because I was part of the board when we passed term limits. Does this committee falls within that, I'm assuming? So right now you mentioned that we have 4 people.
So the 4 civilians that are assigned to the board, one of them was appointed last year. The other 3, we have to ask them because I don't believe we can find any records of when they went on. I'm not sure that they predate Inc., but I don't see the record of where they got on. They've acknowledged they've been there for a long time, and from what they've said, those that remain on that board are there because they said their words, we've seen them come and we've seen them go. People show up for a meeting or two and they never come back. And if we hadn't stayed here, then the board would have just fizzled. So, it's not necessarily that they're hogging seats so much as that they're occupying them out of a sense of responsibility.
That leads back to the question on the board itself, because there is term limits, and we know that they go through a training process. So what is the? Are we reappointing 2 new people and we appointing the existing board? Is that what the?
Can I make a recommendation? My recommendation is that the board have a conversation with the existing members that are on there now, because I think that anybody that served that long, there's some personal feelings about how much you've put into it, and I think that they deserve at least to be heard. And then if it's their time to move on, I would only recommend that they be left in place long enough for us to train their replacements first, instead of removing them and then trying to start over.
To piggyback on now, and I wasn't really thinking of replacing anybody at this point of time, because to me it's essential to have that consistency and the energy to have them to be part of this whole board. And because of the training and how hard schedule wise the training is for new people, and I wouldn't want to take that away, so to speak. So to me that is essential, at least in this particular board. So for us to, again, that should be, I guess, a different discussion, but that's something right now that I just don't feel like is needed. I know it wasn't brought up, but I'm just bringing that up at this point.
Well, I think it's probably worth clarifying what it is, what the term limit regulations or what the code is that says that. And I will say we've had 61 people that have applied for a variety of boards. This is not the board that had the most applicants. So, and then of that, some of the people who said they were interested in this also were interested in other things and are being considered for other positions. So there aren't 61 people lining up to serve on the CPCRB. That said, there are some people who have expressed interest, and there's at least one full position and one alternate position that are looking to be filled, and we have at least 2 people that we've interviewed that are interested that we could put on the agenda for next week as a public, and publicly announce that they'll be appointed, and then we will have a full board. They will not yet be trained. The existing 4 members, 3 members?
4 members.
4 members, one of whom has definitely not exceeded his terms. The other 3 have expired terms. I don't believe we've reappointed anybody in the last, or the 2-year appointments. I don't believe we so they're expired terms. So they're just there until they're replaced. If there were a compelling reason why we wanted to officially reappoint them, and the board could pass a resolution saying we will reappoint them because there is no one else that has expressed interest, that's not really the case right now. But my recommendation is we'll just let it continue for now as we look to, we get it back up and running, we get the onboarding the people that have applied and expressed interest, and we continue to look for more folks to fill in those places. And it is a time of transition. There will be less institutional knowledge, but we do want to have some consistency of attendance and people who are up to speed, and we'll transition people out as we transition people in, but there's not a hurry to do that. Sound good?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think that, what prompted the conversation, in addition to us kind of realizing that, where we were with it was really seeing, why aren't we getting the annual report for how many years, or how many on and off, or when did we do training, when did we not? When do we, so is it a motivation thing? Is it people that just, have invested their time there for so long that maybe it's time to actually meet with them and see where they are and plan ahead, as you said. So that's kind of also what made us prompt, because when you read it, it's like, wow, we can get a report, we could have an informational session every year, and we could really be the leader that we call ourselves to be when it comes to this particular committee. But and it's great that we're actually in a predicament where they don't have to meet a lot. That's a testament to our department. So, but it's really to reviewing complaints is not their only role and mission, right? So if we are going to be the only one, I want to be the best one, the best, the best trained, the most innovative, as we already are known nationwide. So any way that we can do that.
Can I get some clarification when it talks about the annual report? It doesn't specify when and how this annual report is provided. Is it okay?
There was a previous
No.
version of the code, I think, somewhere that it said February or somewhere in there.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about what month it's provided in, although perhaps there's a logic to it. But is it something that would be done in writing? Is it something that would be a public document? Is it something that's presented to us in our position as a Board of Police Commissioners? And is it therefore something that's done in executive session because there might be sensitive information that's being shared?
Well, my view, Mayor, just from looking at it, is it's not given to you in your role as Board of Police Commissioners. This is just a general overview report. For calendar year 2018, we received X number of complaints. We found 10 of them were, let's say, potentially, police officer alleged assault cases. 5 of them were unsubstantiated, whatever. There's no specifics. There's no, so I don't view this as a report to you as in your role as commissioners. This is a report to the board, which could be simply made as a public report put on the website. The annual report of the Civilian Police Complaint Review Board.
With no specifics.
With no specifics at all, correct.
Just statistical.
Just statistical, essentially.
Right,
That's
but
what
no
it is.
names, no information about the cases.
Right.
The landlord-tenant committee also sometimes is on their first one left off the names they thought.
Right.
it was inappropriate. There was no need for it. That's not the purpose of it. It's to say we did 18 of this and this is the resolution. That's the important piece.
In
You
fact,
know,
what they-
John Smith or Joe, Jones is not the issue.
In fact, one of the things that the last thing in the report is to compare statistics from one year to the next.
Right.
So that's what it's basically is a statistical analysis more than anything. No specifics or anything like that. No one's identified.
I would like to add though, once we start to do the reports again, in the annual report, a section that goes over, what the training was, and just for even I can know as a trustee, as a resident, why do we have them train, stuff like that. So.
That would probably be more contained in that informational session where we'd give everybody all of that.
Sounds good.
Oh,
Right, so then
yeah.
we're go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I don't think there's anything that's stopping any board member here from writing an email to the chief and to the chair and say, when you do your report, is it possible to add? It's not a demand. It's like if they can do that. If you have an interest, I don't think anybody objects to suggestions that would make it more informative. This is more of what they have to do. I mean, none of us have ever been shy about asking for things. So if you want, I would encourage that. I think some of the other committees look forward to that because they feel like they need more input. So I think it's perfectly legitimate if you have a desire for so what kind of training? We did 6, they involved X, Y, Z.
All right, sound good to you?
Sure.
All right,
So no subcommittee.
no subcommittee. That's very
Check
exciting.
that
We
off the
can-
list, people.
We so next week I'll give you the names for the resolution, and we will vote on 2
No
new members
liaison either.
and no liaison.
Yeah, we won't.
We're done with our liaison appointments.
All right, done with me?
Unless somebody else wants to do
Thanks,
it.
Oh.
Chief.
I think so,
Thank you,
unless
Chief.
you want to hang
Thank you.
around.
No, I'd like to go home.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just think we don't want to hang around.
All right. So next, we'd like to invite up our treasurer to talk to us about the vehicle and equipment capital purchases.
Do we make copies of this list, by the way?
We
Sometimes you make copies of the list of vehicle
I
purchases.
don't.
got an email.
Did you send it?
I know we got an email, so I didn't want to print
Oh,
it.
looks like
he's
got
got
them.
stuff.
Yeah,
with
okay.
him.
I was gonna say I knew he
Yeah.
tends to do this, so I wasn't gonna print it.
Yeah.
You double paper if he's already killed a tree.
Squinting here.
And I printed it front and back.
Yes, double-sided.
Double
Big
sided.
branch. Thank you. It's easier than looking on my phone.
Chills.
This is a lot of stuff here.
This is an offshoot of the busy budget season that we had, and there was a lot of requests for capital purchases and improvements to infrastructure and such. And part of the process was discussing whether or not we could use fund balance, surplus fund balance from 2018 to pay for a lot of these purchases that in prior years we might have issued serial bonds for. So that's a good use of accumulated surplus fund balance. Certainly it seemed to add up to a lot, but we had a very good year this year with all the vacant positions and such in the budget. You don't always, you never plan on that happening, but in a case like this, when you're able to get through the year and you're thankful to have the money to spend on something like this instead of burdening future budgets with serial bond debt service payments. So anyway, this is a 6-page document. The first 3 pages was in the form of a memo that I understand was sent out previously, describing in general nature of what the request was for. And then I followed it up with the final 3 pages of the actual resolution that I'm asking for adoption at next week's legislative meeting to actually establish the capital projects and to transfer the monies from the general water and sewer funds to pay for these purposes. So in any event, the summary of the items were the vehicles of about $447,000. Equipment was about $300,200, some of which was actually being spent from unexpended appropriations in the 2018 budget, not just surplus fund balance. Included here is the heavy vehicle lift that Central Garage is very anxious to get ordered. They're ready to go once the resolution is adopted and a purchase order is issued. The sidewalk skid loader, and also in the police department, these were items that were in the 2019 capital plan, but the chief found money within his budget with some of these vacant positions. So he issued purchase orders hoping that he could get this started underway. So that's why I included them here in this memo. And also the chlorine booster station at Shaft 4. And also some of these bigger studies and such, the comprehensive plan update, another $150,000. The Route 9 complete streets design, $150,000. The community center functionality and redesign assessment, $100,000. And I don't know if you want to take a moment here, Debbie, to talk about the $77,000 for additional work that's needed as part of the ADA compliant and other improvements up at the Rodriguez Operations Center.
Very well. I actually asked Paul and Andy to come and speak about the need for these additional studies. It was very similar to the last request we had to advance some funds. So I'd like to turn it over to Paul and Andy to explain exactly what it is that we're looking to do in advance of this project in order to keep it going.
Hello again. So that those additional monies are being requested because in the earlier presentations we had on this project, when Andy and I were last in front of you discussing the same, we talked about how some of the manager's programming decisions on what we were going to do in that building were going to be implemented into a project that had really, the design had commenced prior to her tenure. So we made some changes to who was going to sit where and some of the office work that we were going to do, and more or less added to the scope of the project. So that really led to some other things that we were going to be required to do to satisfy some code issues, and then basically additional consulting services to implement those design changes and program changes. They were detailed, I think, in one of the attachments. Not sure what was circulated and what wasn't, but I'll go over them briefly here, and then Andy and I can both discuss the details if we need to. There was an asbestos survey that was not part of the original scope, but I think was necessitated by when we started touching other areas of the building. There was some PCB caulk inspections and testing that we were going to do, and lead-based paint, because we were going to do some additional work where we believe there might be some lead-based paint in some of the older rooms. And when you do demo, you have to deal with that. You just can't paint over it and encapsulate it like we like is really the norm in most areas. A second component of the design, after we discussed the increased scope with the building department, was, sorry, we have to do some hydrant flow testing and hydraulic analysis on the inflow into the building, because the building needs to be sprinkled with fire protection in the areas where we're working. So that's going to have to be, it is presently not, and that's something once we touch we'll have to do to abide by state building code, which leads into a fire protection system that has to be designed. And again, because of the scope increase, there's additional upgrades to the electrical system that we think are going to need to be implemented. That's an area where we're going to encumber monies for design, but may or may not have to, depending on what ends up being the ultimate design. And then the instrumentation associated with that fire protection panel is also additional service. And then we talked about doing some additional site survey work, because there were some items that were added to the outside of the scope as well, not just interior construction items. Vis-a-vis additional parking and some surrounding area improvements that we were looking to make the building a little more accommodating to who we were looking to house there. Again, this is just the consulting component of the work. Obviously, the result of the design would have an impact on the eventual bond amount for construction, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a little while since we've had an update on what the plan is for the Ops Center upgrade. This isn't the forum for getting an update. I don't know how different it is from the last conversation or presentation, and I know you watched it, but you were on the board when we first started talking about it, and then there's been a year, and I'm not sure what the progress is on that, but
Right.
maybe you can update us on that at a future work session.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'd love to do that.
I mean, yes, it definitely should be an agenda because I have a lot of questions, a lot of concerns. I'm not literally, I'm just not happy to see these numbers and not this type of. So I'm gonna hold off to my comments for the next work session when we bring this up. Things of this nature, being in the field, should have been addressed, should have been part of that whole cost estimate, even from the architectural background. Usually when you do a big project like that, MEP elements are part of that. And I remember going over this, and there was going to be some structural components being addressed. So seeing this additional stuff, you know, me personally, I'm not happy with this kind of numbers being thrown out. As is the architectural fee alone, plus the project management fee, it was over $100,000. I think it's a little bit more than that, I believe. Plus, it's been a redesign on this that was additional to what it was cost estimate from the beginning. So, seeing additional numbers, I'm not,
Are you?
I would like to get a
Which thing?
report.
Which line item are you upset
Talking
with?
about
I
the
lost
asbestos,
you.
the lead, the PVC removal, the
The
engineers,
Rodriguez Operations
the
Center.
Rodriguez Operations
So
Center.
all of that stuff. That's
correct.
now
I mean,
77,380.
when you design
Right.
a building, when you're doing a renovation like that, you look at the sprinkle systems. If you're going to be upgrading it, you look at the electrical stuff. That's part of the first survey piece of the architecture. I'm not going to go into details.
I get it. I just
So I'm just expressing myself that, when this comes in front of us, because that was another item that I'm looking forward to see an update now. And so I'll circle and cloud this and put it as a revision for my next conversation when that comes in front of us, I guess.
just for clarity, the items that are here, not all of them are standalone items. Some of them are additional services in those areas, like the remediation component. We knew because we might be touching the floor when this project was originally an elevator and a roof, that we would maybe have to deal with the asbestos tile. But now that we're doing a flip flop of the floors and creation of a conference room and things that were not in the original scope, that's why these are expanded. It's not that we didn't have them in the original proposal. The sprinkler system was something that wasn't initially considered by the building department, but once we reviewed again the new scope and the new area that we were performing renovations, our building inspector determined that the entire areas would need to be sprinkled.
I understand that, Paul.
Okay.
But that's part of the architects when they go in there and they have to do a feasibility study, and that's recommendations that should have been accounted within at that time. And again, it goes for electrical, sprinkle, and mechanical stuff.
No, I understand. Again,
I'm not, again, I'm gonna hold off to the rest of the comments and more questions that I have until this comes back in front of the board with a full, sort of like a full topic. So I'm just gonna leave it like that.
If I may, Paul, my understanding is that all of this project has changed scope. I mean, the goal of this is to get a final scope for then we can go into construction, correct? That's my understanding of the whole project, right?
We have
The design
the
phase.
final scope. We went
Well,
back and
the
forth a
design
few
phase,
times,
sorry,
right? We had some designs, some redesigns, but now we have what everybody agrees is the final design. And in order to take the final design to construction documents, this is what we need to have.
Thank you.
Well, I think we need to get these calendared. We need an understanding and order of priority of where we are with each of these projects in simple English. Like, this is what it's going to look like, and this is what we're paying for it, and this is the timeline on all the projects. Because what are the goals? What are the steps? Obviously, the ones that are farther out should go last. But we have what, like 40 something Wednesdays divided by 2, because half are legislative and half are work, divided by emergencies that come up and X, Y, and Z, and you're like left with a dozen Wednesdays to do this on in a year, really, because the last 2 months is all about budgets. So I suggest in January you start thinking about when we're getting updates, how this plays out, because these are significant investments that drive other things. And this has gone through a number of changes, so we just need a good refresher of like, this is where we are, and this is what we thought it would look like, and now it looks like, and this is the final, and make sure we all understand that.
In numbers, please. I would like to see numbers and what has changed and what will change, because I know we talked about $2 million and then it was $6 million, or whatever the number is now. I would like to see numbers, budget numbers. I know it's not going to be a solid number, but I would like to see all this broken down into line items.
Sure. I know when I first started, the number I heard, because this had started prior to me coming, we were looking at 4 million, and after the first draft came through, it was 9 million. And if you remember, I told the board we weren't going to accept that, so we had to go back and make some changes to bring it back down.
I don't think it's a criticism. I actually think it's a good thing. You start somewhere, you go down a journey, you make changes, you take things off, you add things on. That's what's supposed to happen, right? I mean, that's very good stuff. I mean,
Far along too.
yeah, so this is like a good update. This is where we are. This is what we're doing. And everybody should know that, because the worst case scenario is that you move forward and we all have a different understanding of the cost and what it looks like.
So far,
This is
we've been,
probably one of the first ones.
sorry, it's been a year, over a year, about a year, plus or minus.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think so.
Are we going to talk? I'm sorry. Are we going to talk about the other numbers as well? Because I
Yeah,
have
we need to
questions
go back to
for.
Tom. I just wanted
Okay.
them to be here to talk about this additional work that they need to do for the construction documents. Because that's what this is about.
Oh, I understand. I have a question about removal of trees. I thought that was a part of something else. Why is that here as an extra?
No. Oh,
Can I address that, please?
Yep.
It has nothing to do with that, with the operations center.
Yes, the
Under studies.
there was a bid for the removal of the trees that was awarded by the board, and the problem right now is that I have no funding for the removal of the trees. They'd be an appropriate part of the new Indian Brook Water Treatment Plant capital project,
Right.
but we haven't passed any bond resolution. So right now, I just don't have any funding to pay for this contract, and that's why I included it here. And that's going to be funded by unexpended appropriations within the water fund. But we wanted to include this as part of the cost of the actual capital project, and that's why it's listed here.
Okay.
So the total list is about $1.3 million, of which the general fund portion is less than $1.1 million. And on page 4, it shows that general fund appropriations in the 2018 budget, $170,713. The water fund portion is $214,000. The sewer fund portion is about $7,500, and then the actual general fund appropriated fund balance would be $912,393. Was there any other questions on this section before I move on to the?
I had a couple of comments that are related to what we're talking about. For many years, the village did not have a vehicle use policy. We finally put one in place a couple of years ago. There are a couple of vehicles that are being issued. We obviously have a new fire chief every couple of years, so we've got a new person who's using the vehicle, and I see the manager is getting a vehicle. Up to this point, she's had a stipend paying for her vehicle, but it looks like she's transitioning to a village vehicle. And it's probably just a good refresher as a matter of personnel to provide everybody who is going to have a personal use vehicle with what the vehicle use policy is. It's not the primary personal vehicle to be used. It's, so things of that nature. And then are we moving into, or did we just kind of blend into all that, the 200 Main Street rehabilitation for $900,000?
I actually didn't get to that.
Okay, then I'll let you get to that.
Okay. In the middle of the page, I discussed some unusual and extraordinary expenses we had this past year. Actually, the police department in the 2018 capital plan intended to be funded from 2017 surplus was supposed to be the engineering and design work for their HVAC system, which is going to be a capital project next year, and also for the replacement of the carpet, which they went ahead and did based on our recommendation that it was an oversight, that it was supposed to be funded a year ago at this time when we were establishing capital projects from fund balance. So they actually found some money within their budget. So I'm only asking for $35,000 for these two items. And then we talked earlier in the year about the emergency boiler replacement at the community center, $24,245, which at the time we had enough appropriations within the recreation budget, but it was very early in the year, and we were waiting to see how things looked for the balance of the year. And so they actually do need the money to pay for this expense because they had their normal monthly expenditures for building maintenance. And then there was a significant unanticipated repair to truck 42 in the fire department, $22,806. Again, at the time that they had to have these expenses done, there was enough money in their budget because it was early in the year. But as the year progressed, it became obvious that they weren't going to be able to find this money within their budget to pay for this expense. And that's why it's coming back at this time. And this is the resolution on page 6. The three items totaling $82,051. And the recommendation is to fund it from the general fund contingency. Right now, there's about $316,000, I believe, in the contingency account. So, you know, we have more than enough to absorb these expenses in the contingency budget. And then the last part of this memo that the mayor had started asking about were things that I was intending on coming back again in 3 weeks, I believe, at the next work session. These are the larger items that we actually had to get a bond resolution from our bond council for the VACO truck, the new sanitation truck, and the rehabilitation of one of the existing sanitation trucks, the fire apparatus for Ossining Hose Company. And I sent this as a email to Debbie. I wasn't sure if we were ready to proceed with having a bond issued for some of the additional work at 200 Main Street, which I'm not sure if that's on our radar right now to start doing additional work on that building. But you know, we could either issue the bond resolution now for that or delay it until a future time when we're ready to go on that project. And then also the police department HVAC system, $250,000. And then I did list some of these other projects, which at this time I'm not bringing these forward unless there's a specific request to fund some of these items, like the when we discussed during the budget the possible electric fleet vehicles, which we weren't sure there was grant for that. There's going to be there was the request to improve some of the basketball courts at many of the village parks, which were going to be paid for from the in lieu of parkland monies from the developers, which needs a resolution to become a capital project to allow that work to be done.
Where are we with the legal aspects of the 200 Main Street story saga? that began 2 years ago?
There was Corinthian has started legal action number 3, which was started the end of November, early December, and it will be responded to as have the other 2, and hopefully we'll get the same result. But there is a legal action that was just really recently commenced. The other 2 were dismissed.
Well, now I will continue to recuse myself from this, and I am still as in the dark as anyone who's not a part of these executive sessions, although I could read the court cases. That's about it. Trustee Rivera?
Stuart, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm pretty sure I asked this question when we were discussing the authorization of the roof that was being fixed
Right.
and has been fixed.
Right.
I asked, in the meantime, regardless of any litigation, it's that we're still responsible for the building. It's still our building. And at that point, I'm not sure if litigation number 2 had finished or was settled or whatever the case was. But regardless of litigation number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that shouldn't stop us from addressing a building that is in far worse shape. I mean, every day it's getting worse, as we have said. I mean, I started the administration with Mayor Garrity in 2015, and 5 years later, we're still talking about the building, right? So, and it's not been the fault of the board solely of why that building has operated the way it has. Stuff was, half of it's really out of our hands, right? But it's just 5 years of that building getting worse. Thank God, I and some other people on the board last year, along with Debbie, had to beg the board to at least fix the roof so water wouldn't fall in. And as we continue to uphold ourselves with our buildings to the same standard as we want people to do with their buildings, I think it's very important for us to just move forward in just making us able to fix the building to just walk in. Then the board can decide on our own what direction we want to use it or lack thereof, or how we want to go. But I am a big supporter of that amount of money in the budget to address the building that's in the gateway of our downtown that's fallen apart. So that's all.
I don't think there's any question that we would like the building at the gateway of our downtown to be well utilized and open to the public and a vibrant contributor to our economic development. Burdening the public taxpayers with $900,000 for a building that 2 years ago the board had a very different approach, which was to invite private entities to invest in the building and make it a usable space again. And then we went into contract. We pulled out of the contract and we've been in litigation ever since. Replacing the roof seemed like a logical investment to stem the deterioration of the building. I don't understand what $900,000, why that is necessary, because I've not been part of any of these meetings, but if we're going to be investing $900,000 at some point, I do feel like I and the rest of the public need to understand what this is and why it is appropriate for nearly $1 million to be spent by the taxpayers for this building that at one point we thought could be paid for by a private entity.
Didn't you explain the need for that number? Pretty sure I was at a meeting where you broke it down.
So Paul was able to reach out to a contractor that could come in and do an assessment. There is asbestos and lead-based paint in there, so some of the cost is associated with contamination removal. Because of all of the leakage that happened from the roof, the basement is in really bad shape, so it needs to be cleaned up. So 900,000 is maybe not the number. I would recommend that we not bond this right away and that we go out to bid and get some other construction estimates and then look at what the details are so that we have the numbers on where that money would be spent and how much, and do an RFP for that.
Now, one time you were looking at some grants, but did we not get those?
We did not get those
Okay.
grants.
I'm not going to go into the history of the building, but I do have similar questions as Mayor Garrity mentioned. $900,000. And Debbie, you just mentioned something else that we are going to go out to bid. So I guess as a general question that I have is, do we need construction documents? Do we need some sort of drawings? Do we need some sort of engineering reports that we need to go back? Because a contractor cannot just come in and say, all right, what do I do?
Correct.
So is
We
there
need a scope
anything-
of service.
is that part of the $900,000?
To write the scope of service? Yes,
So the
do
soft
the
cost,
construction
the soft cost
documents.
is with this, included with this.
that
Have you
was.
approached an engineer firm or an architectural firm at
Are
all?
they? Yeah. I'll ask Paul to come up and talk about it.
Hello again. So the 900,000, I believe, was a number plus some contingency that we used for the grant application. The derivative of that number was something we discussed internally when we were applying for the grant, where we can apply with an environmental contractor and remediation consultant doing the consulting and the testing as well as the remediation. So we put together a grant. We reviewed it with procurement, adherence with finance, and we reviewed it with the manager's office and council, and we were using it for a grant. So it's not something that we definitely were going to do, but it was definitely something that we used to scope the grant amount. That's where the number is coming from. So as far as bid documents and design documents, that was included in that because it was a design build approach where this person was going to come in and give us a turnkey product. The product we were looking to inherit after this work, now that we have finished the roof and took all the dunnage and everything else that was causing a lot of the water in the building, was basically a clean palette inside. Everything inside was considered contaminated because of some of the demolition that had taken place over the years. Once that was deemed to have asbestos in it, that basically classifies the whole building as potentially containing asbestos, and that's why the whole building needs to be essentially gutted and brought down to the existing structure. So that second floor that was in there was all coming out. All of the ductwork and piping and plumbing that was in there would all come out. You'd basically be left with an empty building. Yes, thank you, a shell. But with a new roof, so you would have to, you were able to keep the water out, but you would be left with a building that was completely remediated, at which point then you'd have to take it to the next step, which is HVAC, to make sure that something like that wouldn't happen again, or after you have it remediated, the idea, I think, was, if I speak out of turn, correct me, I think the idea was to take that and put that and try to market that with whatever the board's druthers was at the time, whether that be continuing to use as a village building or put out an RFP, but at least you're putting out an RFP or considering a use with a non-contaminated building.
So my question is, again, so you asking, well, our Tom's request in here is $900,000. We do not have a report of an engineer. We do not have any other additional information that a contractor can come in and give us an estimate number of what this whole thing could be.
Oh,
We
we
do.
do.
We do. Okay.
And I'll send it to you. I made a note to send it to you in the morning.
I mean, at least I don't know if the rest of the board has it, but I don't.
They
I don't
do.
have that.
Yep.
So that's my biggest. So can we get a number? I guess I don't know if the rest of the board agrees, but can we get a number with that? Can we go out to bid and actually find out a real number, not a budget number, and how much this is may cost? And maybe
That was not a
$900,000.
budget number. That was a proposal to do the work. That is a real number.
So can we send that out?
And it was
before we
less
even-
than 900. This 900, I think, was a tick up for the manager to have some contingency in the estimate.
So can we get that number? Can we go out to bid and figure it out, and then we go from there? I'm assuming. If I don't know what the rest of the board will feel.
So what did you need contingency for?
Because you never know what you're going to run into when you start opening walls.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to add that we own the building, so like it's not really I mean, we could allow it to either deteriorate or eventually demolish it or sell it for a building if we don't want to actually maintain it, but like something has to be done. So board later as we go goes, you know what, guys, just close to $1 million taxpayer money is, we feel the majority of the board is that we don't want to invest it because of XYZ reasons. Cool. We still need a backup plan to how that building, which is contaminated and eventually going to be a health risk for the entrance to downtown, how that's going to be addressed, regardless of whether we pay for it or
Again,
not.
I agree with you in that area, but I'm not gonna say let's do it $900,000. Let's say for argument's sake is $1.5 million. We don't know that, and until I see some numbers, I cannot agree to amount either more or less. So I would like to see some numbers. Obviously, when you go out to bid, you're gonna have at least 3 competitive bidders, and we're gonna see, sort of like the middle guy or the lowest, whatever, however that comes out to be, and then we can have a solid number. And obviously, that could be a contingency. So I'm
with you. That was the original. That number was given so they can go out to get those numbers for us, and then for us to actually be part of the next step.
So
Well, let me just clarify that a little bit, if I may. The number, when we discussed this internally, we were creating something a little different than what is the norm. A remediation design build, or remediation design remediation. There would be no bidding because a lot of the remediation, the design, and the study is really professional service. You go in there, you test, you scope, and you present. The remediation component is a biddable item. So if we're not going to consider funding the approach of a consult remediate, then we do need to put some money set aside for the consultant to put together the bid documents. Because essentially what this company did is they went out and assessed the entire building. They were in and out of the building 4 or 5 different times, identifying, quantifying what was in there. And that's how they developed the remediation number, because they know specifically what's in the building. If it's not the board's decision to proceed with this consult and remediate approach, then we need to set aside some money to bring in a strict consultant only, who's going to create a document and then do the testing while the remediation is ongoing. I don't have a firm number. Actually, I don't want to present any number for that tonight until we go and discuss it offline and get an idea, more likely than not from the same consultant, what would be your design and bid document creation and consulting and testing services during remediation. I think we get a proposal like that, and then we come back and say, do you want to proceed remediating this building? These are the documents that need to be created, and this is how much we need to pay to get those documents.
And thank you, Paul, to clarify now. It seems like the concept or the idea that you guys had originally is more like a design build sort of
Exactly.
speak. So that's okay.
Not so to speak, exactly that. Yeah.
So I would like to understand that a little bit better. So maybe you can fill me in, and maybe the rest of the board, is aware of that. I'm not. So I would like to get filled in that, and I can, make a rational, smart decision on this particular topic. But right now, I can't. I don't have all the facts, and I don't have all the information needed for this. So,
Esther, I'm going to talk to you and get some legal advice because I'm tired of not being a part of this. This is like so far removed from the reason I recused myself. The fact that I don't know what's going on is ridiculous. So I'll speak to you offline.
While this is in litigation, we cannot do anything with the building as far as selling it or bidding it out.
You would not be able to sell it because there's what's called a notice of pendency against the building. So any prospective purchaser would see that and would note that they're purchasing it subject to that. So
Okay.
that would stand in the way of purchase. Stand in the way of sale.
Stand in the way of a sale.
So there were 2 paths here tonight. There was one with the $900,000. You came up with whatever your documentation for that. And there was the thing that was discussed with Trustee Casada about going out, getting bid documents. Are we still on 2 paths, or are we making a decision right now?
I mean, the majority of projects that were in our budget, or that we allocate, a lot of our projects we allocate more money to because we don't know what the final scope's going to be. So it's not the first time that we do that for any departmental, capital project. This will allow them to actually do that second part, actually then know what you want to know, and for us to know what the final number will be, or what it's going to, this is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is a continuation of that process to allow it to actually happen and allow us to get to that point that we could have a discussion and say, hey, listen, we got the info. This is what it's going to cost, right? Am I?
And just keep in
That's
mind,
not what I heard him
this
say.
board already approved because this is
Yeah.
part of the budget. So this is already approved.
Right.
But last year's approval. So to me, I a lot of stuff is just to try to understand what the background of this whole thing is. If it has 3, it passes. It's very simple. Simple as that, sure. So
Just to clarify, putting something in the budget doesn't mean it's approved.
Right.
It means it's an
this
intention,
is the
and
intent
then
for the capital project, there was
passing the
approved as a
resolution
whole
for the
number.
bond or
Correct.
for
Yes.
establishing the capital
It's,
project.
But the understanding was that this was important to the board last year, and that's the reason
Right.
why this was part of the capital project. So
But
again,
to go back to what Tom actually said here was that he was this list is things that he's planning to come back to us at a future board work session with more details on, right? Tom, that this list, so we're not voting on anything next week. This is just like a heads up. This is what's coming up. And I would say you could move up higher on the list if this paragraph is like the next set of stuff. I mean, maybe you don't need it because you're going to wait till the spring anyway, but the park improvements we're using the in lieu of parkland funds. I mean, I think everybody's very, I mean, that wasn't something that was controversial. It may just be a timing thing that you have that sort of lower on the list here.
Well, I mean, this project, at least to me, is a priority. I mean, it's contaminated. It's getting worse. It affects us in many different ways. So I do want to get to the next step and also address and make sure that my colleague, Trustee Casada, is comfortable that he has enough information for us to be able to have the opportunity to move forward or not.
Well, Tom, you were asking to come back to a future board work session to discuss this in detail, and I think that sounds wise.
Yeah, I'm not saying tonight. I'm just saying I don't want to
I was hoping that in 2 weeks, which is the next work session, it could be discussed if it needs to be, but then the intent was that it would be on the next legislative session to have the
6th.
bond resolutions, first meeting in February, I believe.
So can you?
That was the intent, was to bring these bond resolutions because just like the other vehicles, Paul's ready to order that backhaul.
if I may, Stuart, help me out with this. And I don't want to be the person who holds this process because there's other items in here that are obviously important. So can I stop by your office, Debbie, and probably Paul, if you don't mind being in there, and kind of fill me in the parts that I'm missing in here, and if the rest of the board is okay, this could be as a part of the agenda for next week. I again,
So
the rest of the board feels
What are you asking for next
to
week?
be for the resolution because that's what Tom is asking in a way.
Resolution
You have
on
a
what, though?
resolution?
Now, these items that would be bonded aren't ready to be
Okay.
voted on because they need to actually, ask our bond counsel to write the
So
resolution.
you still need 2 more weeks.
I need him. He needs time to write bond resolutions.
So when it comes to us in 2 weeks, his hope would
Okay.
be that it would just be sort of a perfunctory, by the way, this will be on your,
Okay.
your next list.
That's fine.
but this next week would be the resolution for the items at the beginning.
Correct.
Right.
Okay,
Not
okay,
the
fine.
last paragraph we
Not the
just
last.
discussed.
Correct.
The first pieces.
First,
Bonding would come, we talk about bonding in 2 weeks
Right.
and then.
Right.
So could you send around the background information of how you got to the 900,000?
Yep, absolutely.
Alright.
And I'd love to have you come in. We'll all sit down and go through this. I got great pictures.
Great. That's nice.
Before Paul and Andy go, Debbie, we had some emails going around about the potential grant application for the Riverkeeper brought to our attention only because it's time sensitive.
Right.
And Steve Ho had sent his email this afternoon. He'd reviewed it and offered his
Yep,
comments.
I haven't had a chance to talk to them, but I was down at Riverkeeper today, meeting with them, and so I did get to talk to them a little bit about that application, and they said they'd be willing to help us as well. So we'll figure out how to get that done.
I just wanted, usually when we're going out for a grant application, we fill in the board and there's such a time sensitivity. I wanted to
Right.
give the board some heads up that Riverkeeper has brought to our attention some grants which should be related to, do you want to give us you're nodding your head or you just are acknowledging?
Yeah,
that
no,
we'll talk about-
we talked about it through email. We actually went back and forth a couple times. We met with Steve Ho, who's going to kind of spearhead it for us on our behalf, and we've already interacted with Dan with somebody the first blush of information that Dan has already. I think Dan is going to drive the application process. Thanks, Andy. But essentially, It's really trying to procure a grant. It's going to require some upfront expenditure on our part, maybe some consultant services, but we're going to try to do as much of it as we can in house. With between Andy, myself, Steve, Dan has offered to help as he always does,
Yeah, from
and essentially it's going to be a grant to help enhance the protection measures that are in place already for the watershed parcels to the Indian Brook Reservoir. Now, the Indian Brook Reservoir, as you know, is one of our raw water suppliers for our potable water plant. On average, it supplies about 30% of our raw water. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but it's still worthy of protection. T-Town takes care of the majority of that, but there are private parcels that span from different towns. There's Yorktown, there's Cortland, there's Town of Boston, Newcastle, and then our own village that all have parcels within the watershed. So it's going to be a multi-jurisdictional type coordination thing, and that's where the logistics are going to be the biggest challenge here. But at the end of the day, it's all for a good cause because it's a precious resource. So we're on it. And we're also going to be here because I believe you want us in executive session based on my first presentation. So we're really not going anywhere. Do you want it? Because you mentioned we were leaving, but I don't think we are.
Oh, you're stuck, huh? Yeah. Did you want
I have an unrelated question to ask them. So if you wanna
Okay, I just
stay
wanted to make sure
unrelated.
it's the grant application is due February 15th, and it just came to us this week. So this is wanted to make sure that the board
Just
was
forward
supportive
because
of it.
I mean, it sounds like it's something that
Absolutely.
you know,
Yeah. It was something that Riverkeeper had put out in the last couple of days, where the village trying to figure out how much if we could really make it happen, and how much demand it would be on our staff, and then what would be the balance of reward. And it sounds like it's worth pursuing. So thanks everybody for spending the last 48 hours making sure that it's a
So we're in January, and this is a time to talk about internships. You have great internships and some really exciting stuff happening. You know, you and I have talked about engineering, waste management, water, all big topics. We're fortunate enough, I think we have, I'm sorry if I have your titles wrong, Reverend and Minister, right? Or are you both, I don't know, in the room. But I'd really like the churches. Yeah, I know everybody's on their cell phone. It's okay. um, what I never get the titles right. I apologize, Reverend and Minister, but I'd like to use the local churches. I'd like to use the local synagogue as well to push internships, engineering positions, internships in your department. The village manager, I think we put placeholder, at least I had asked for. You don't need to do all 6. There's some great internships for folks, and we need to find better ways than more ways to get our kids, high school and college, to get these internships. And Riverkeeper, this project, writing grants. I know it's in February, I get it. This is when they all are looking for internships, paid. Some of them I think are paid, some aren't. So we have 2 community leaders. I really think that reminded me to ask you guys to push that. They get jobs with you guys. Next thing, they get big jobs all over the country.
I'm hiring two as a trustee, so good reminder.
Okay.
Yep. Noted.
Okay, so please on the website, like visible, and then let's get it out to the churches and synagogues and community center and all sorts of fun places. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the next topic.
What's that?
Local Law 1, 2019, regarding residential leases. I have Stuart on here to discuss.
Copy of the.
I'm sorry?
Is it a copy of the?
No.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Really?
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
let me go over a couple of things. The
Just
thought
looking.
behind this was something that had actually been discussed a while ago when we were originally talking Landlord-Tenant Relations Council, before we actually revamped the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council. And one of the ideas was, can we, within the village, require written residential leases for all units? As folks know, under ETPA, those units must have written leases, either 1 or 2 year leases. The question is, can you expand that? And the work that the research I've done and the research my paralegal has done leads us to conclude that you can do that. You can actually, require, written leases. What we're trying to work out, and on a couple of things, is that's almost the easy question to answer, is that you can just have written leases. But then the next question is, one, how do you enforce it? And what is a penalty if someone doesn't do that? Do you require, does that mean then that if someone ordinarily just offers month-to-month leases, you're going to require them to have them as written leases? Because most of our month-to-months are in fact not written leases. One of the thoughts with regard to, and let me just point this out, what I don't want the village to become is the repository of thousands of leases coming in every year. One thought is that landlords would have to verify that all of the units in their building are in fact subject to written leases. That could be through affidavit, that could be through some statement. Does that include a registry? Because I know that there was a tie-in as when we were originally having that discussion there, as one way to do that. And how does the village enforce that? Is it something that would be, that could be brought, through the justice court as a violation of the village code if someone in fact does not offer such an agreement? I expect that there will be opposition because there are many folks who just simply don't. There are many landlords who don't offer written leases. Just they go month to month, and that's how it is. And month-to-month leases are accepted in New York. It's not, we're not reinventing that wheel. But I think that the way to look at this is that we simply say that, for leases that are issued for units within the village of Ossining, they have to be in writing. Now, we're not saying what has to be in the lease, because that was something else we had talked about, is specifically what needs to be in the lease, what are the protections. And I should point out, the Landlord-Tenant Council has actually done a lot of work on this. They are currently working on a Tenants' Bill of Rights. And one of the things that I recently sent back to them was certain requirements relating to smoke and carbon monoxide, so that they're going to be quoting from the current code, not past codes, as to what's required. And that's an important document, which I think they're going to try to get out to as many folks as they can with regard to that. And it's still a work in progress, but they've moved, miles with regard to getting that done in terms of from the early drafts. But I think the idea behind the proposed local law 1, and I do apologize because I ran out of time to put all my thoughts down onto paper, was that that leases that are, and we could start it, that are for a certain period of time have to be in writing. It's mandated by village code. We simply, you put in that any of those leases, have to be in writing. They have to be, signed by, obviously, the tenant, signed by the landlord's representative. They have to provide, the bare minimums is what we have said, which is essentially you have to have what the rent is. They have to have what the renewal provision would be. I know later there will be a discussion with regard to ETPA. As you folks all know, under ETPA, renewals are pretty much guaranteed unless the tenant has done something so egregious that that person can in fact be removed from their tenancy. Under normal state law or under non-ETPA, basically at the end of a lease period, if the landlord wants to, the landlord can simply not renew the lease. They're not required to give a reason not to renew the lease. So one of the things I think that is a subject of discussion here is, are we just going to simply require written leases without any of those other protections there? We all know what protections ETPA has in it in terms of, rent increases, which are governed by rent guidelines boards. If you had, if you required written leases of non-ETPA units, there is no rent guidelines board. Landlord could still raise rents to a certain amount. But the idea would be, and the let me just say it this way, the importance of a written lease is it provides the tenant with greater protection. There is a document on both sides. It provides certain rights to the tenant in terms of, for example, when can the landlord enter your apartment? When can the landlord make repairs? What repairs is the landlord responsible for? That's some of the things, in fact, that are in the tenant's right document that the LTRC is working on is, what does the landlord have to do with certain repairs? What are you responsible for as a tenant? In a lot of these month-to-month tenancies where people just come into the unit, they pay a couple of bucks, they literally don't know what their rights are and what they're not. A written lease will tell you what your rights are. Now, ultimately, it's for a court to say what those rights are. And we are not going to be representing the tenant in a court proceeding. But this document will at least provide the tenant with something to go into court with if they have to, be it as a subject of an eviction proceeding, or on the other side, as someone seeking to perhaps get a rent abatement because the landlord has not provided heat for 5 weeks. I get the initial calls on every landlord LTRC complaint. They come through me because that's where the email comes through. We get a lot of heat complaints. We get a lot of complaints. What we get primarily are complaints of landlords who simply, from the landlords, are not responsive. I had a tenant who said to me, I live in a particular location. I did not have heat. I didn't have heat and hot water for 8 days, and I literally called not only the local representative, I went all the way up the corporate hierarchy, and no one ever called me back. Now that person has a written lease, but still, there are many in this village who we know do not. I think CCE during their study determined there were a lot of folks that didn't have written leases out there. It just provides another level of protection for folks. We have a lot of people who come here as first-time renters, and to be honest, it also provides protection from the landlord's end because it's a document that they can use as well. This says what your responsibilities are. You as the tenant, you have to pay your rent at this particular time. This is what you have to do. It's not, the handshake agreement in terms of all that stuff doesn't work. It doesn't work in court for either side, but generally that's to the detriment of the tenant because a lot of the tenants, if you go into landlord-tenant, it's the landlords who are generally represented by counsel. Tenants generally are not, unless they're able to get, legal services or somebody else. The document provides a basis of support for the particular tenant in whatever situation. So I am of the view that you can require within the village that those units have written leases, regardless if they be ETPA or not units. You can, we don't have to, in a sense, cleave off just the ETPA units and say you're the only ones. That's true. They are required to by state law, but Village Code does not, prohibit, us from entering into that type of agreement with those kind of leases. So the proposal would be to make that requirement. My thought with regard to having landlords provide proof of what they have done, my initial thought was essentially an annual affidavit filing by the landlord for each building. I have X number of tenants in this building, and this is what, and each of them have received a lease. Now, and if the tenant then comes up and notifies, let's say, the LTRC, well, by the way, I don't have a lease. Well, but the landlord said he did. Now, that could be a violation under our code. It could also create, issues that the tenant may have there as well. Because, again, we're asking a lot of our code enforcement officers already. As I said, I don't want to create a repository of leases for the village. That's not our job to basically do that. But I think it does create and lead to a broader question of a landlord registry in terms of what was talked about months ago, when I first started here. So that's years ago. So the thought is that, you can have written residential leases, and I'm only referring here to residential. I'm not talking about commercial. Generally, in commercial, you have written leases anyway. A lot of these leases, if you've seen them, they're pretty much they're known as Blumberg form leases. They're standard in terms of what's in there. Sometimes they have a document at the end which is called a rider, which may have some additional paragraphs. Could you have a dog in your building? Can you, things like that. But it just provides the protection. And I think that's really what we're trying to look for, is to at least protect not just the folks who are in the pre-1974 buildings, but the folks who are in the post-1974 buildings. And also folks who are in buildings that have fewer than 6 units, because we have a number of those as well. And those are also fall outside the coverage of ETPA. So what I'd like to have for the board, and we can even do it as continuing business next week, is to actually have something for you folks to look at in terms of an actual ordinance with words and things like that on paper. I'll have it to you, and I know Trustee Herrera, because I want to keep to my promise this year to have things earlier than I used to. I will try very much to have it to you no later than first thing Monday morning, and if I'm really lucky, I'll have it to you probably by late Friday afternoon. So you'll have a weekend to look it over and see what it is. I invite all your comments on this, because I think there are a lot of things to work out on it as to how it should be done. I expect that we'll hear from a lot of different organizations, both from the tenants and from the landlords end. But I think it's an important step, and I think at least if we can do that, we have it. I should point out that Bedford, if I'm not mistaken, has a requirement for written leases that relate to their affordable units. And Bedford's not an ETPA community, but they do have it for their affordable units. This would be broader, because this would apply to all units across the board. It wouldn't just be the affordables. So my thought is that if we could put this as a continuing business matter next week, I'll have something and we can have some further discussions. But I invite to hear from any of you before I put pen to paper or my fingers to the keyboard, so that we can start to put that together. There's no real template for this, because it doesn't exist elsewhere, frankly, to really require that. So we're gonna, on this one, we're gonna be starting anew. So any further suggestions you folks have, I'm more than happy to incorporate, and then we can have a further discussion on that.
You meant the next work session, not next week.
Well, next week we could do it during continuing business next week as part of the legislative, because I know folks are. It's a matter that the board, I think, wants to do. So I'm happy to do that, and then we can continue it at the work session on the 23rd.
Any questions, comments, or advice for council as he puts together what terms we'd like to see in there?
When Quantel and I worked for, as you know, you were the third party. The two of us did a subcommittee. There were 5 items. And 2 were approved. More could have been approved. Quantel and I mean, it's no secret, we don't agree in concept to everything related to the topic, but we really came up with 5 really big ideas. I mean, super, like, one of a kind, out of the box, right? This was one of them. And you don't have to convince me that this is fabulous, because we hashed through it. I think some of our issues are implementation. It's not just even the cost, it's what you just brought up. Okay, so how do you then implement? How do you punish those that don't behave correctly? There is no question that the landlords, the tenants, and the other, which is neither landlord nor tenant, I think unanimously, all sides said leases should be given to everybody, because they protect both the landlord and the tenant. Some of the things we get are like, my landlord came in through my apartment and they're not allowed to come in. The answer is actually, yeah, they are allowed to come in if it's for some cause that they told you about. But you wouldn't know that since you don't have a lease. Like, it actually sets forth, and there's both a rights for the tenant that they're establishing and rights for landlords, because that's sort of what they do. They look at, I think this is, I don't want to use the word revolutionary, but I really feel it is. The question is whether you do all the rentals. But we had some notes. Like, I feel like, as far as ideas for Stuart, didn't we have some notes and conversations? And you have everything. Yeah, because I'm happy for the 3 of us to like talk by phone and sort of reinvigorate the conversation. I'm sure that Quantel is too, but this is one of the 5 items that we thought would be really important, and it would be for everybody. And I think our discussion about this and other things were, do you do only 10 and up, 6 units and up, all units? It really came down to that kind of stuff rather than the principle of people should have leases. They should be done. And I don't think you mentioned it, but I think that the landlord town committee, I'm like crying because I'm going to miss it because I'm no longer the liaison. Manny is going to miss the group, frankly. Actually, are going to be doing it in English and Spanish, if I'm not mistaken, as well. That came up as well. So I think it's going to be really great. They're really now picking up. It's pretty new. But I mean, I'm happy to refresh and reinvigorate. I don't know how you feel, Quantel, but I think this is a pretty big deal.
So it's an interesting conversation. I think for me, when we talk about tenants' rights and leases, those are two different paths for me because your lease can say a lot of things or it can say very little, right? So a lease in itself doesn't, I doesn't mean that much, right? I think the 5 recommendations that we initially gave, um, those 5 recommendations together create something totally different than just requiring that all municipalities have leases. Um, so my question to you is one, I would give you more, but I don't have anything to respond to. So a document is important. And then two, what does New York State rental property law allow you to do? Like, how far can you push a situation? Because my understanding, the paper that was given by the Attorney General is that there are, there are New York State property laws, right? And a tenant outside of an ETPA eligible building has the right not to be retaliated against. So ETPA and non-ETPA are totally different. ETPA is a slew of rights.
You are correct.
Right? But a municipality is not really just like it's pretty much laid out. But if you're not in that, you're kind of left out there. There are people all across the state that are pushing to get rent stabilization, right? To expand that process because if local municipalities could, they would do it. Kingston would do something. So
But it's only limited to certain counties anyway.
yeah. So what I'm saying is, I understand that it's only limited to certain counties. What can you really do? Like how far can you push the
Well,
limit?
the question you ask is a good one because it brings up a whole issue of essentially municipal home rule
Mhm.
and how far can you basically go beyond what the state provides, and that's something that Lisa and I have looked into to see exactly how far you can go. There are certain tenant rights which, by law, by court decision, tenants have, and those are not necessarily codified in the real property law of the state of New York. But there are certain things that courts simply accept that this is what should be allowed, should not be allowed. I had someone call me last week. Uh, it's like 3 weeks before her lease is to end. Now she had a lease, and the landlord suddenly comes in and says, "I'm going to redo the entire kitchen." So basically, at Christmas time, she had no kitchen, and she said, "What am I supposed to do?" She basically decided she wasn't going to do anything because she's getting out of there by the end of the year anyway.
Mm.
But the fact is that under the term, and I hadn't seen her lease, but even under a standard Blumberg lease, landlord can't do that. You're not permitted to do that. You first have to give prior notice, and you can't put the tenant in a position of essentially knocking them out of their own home. You're not allowed to do that. But your question goes to essentially how far can we go if if the state basically has it as these particular requirements. Our job is to work within those requirements. There are certain anti-discrimination provisions in the real property law which apply across the board to tenants, not just
So I think what's helpful is I understand what you're saying. Lay it out. Lay it
That's
out.
fine.
I mean, but again, just just saying everyone's getting a lease. I mean that. I mean, I've seen leases. I know people who have leases.
Well, the whole
it
thing,
doesn't really.
the devil comes down to the details in that. How far do you, you're absolutely right. You could have leases and they could all simply say the same thing and they don't really get you where you want to go. I mean, all it means, it's just, it's another piece of paper. It's more than just the lease. The lease is important because I think if a person doesn't have a lease, you know, their ability to essentially hold over, their ability, the landlord's ability to essentially say, it's much broader for the landlord than it is in the sense of if not when you have a lease. So that's one of the areas where you want to do that. But you're correct, is that you have to have more than just give people leases.
So is this something that the landlord tenant council recommended to you, or like did Sonia come to you and say, "Hey, um, you know, we're furthering, we've."
Well, the landlord tenant councils come to me with not specifically as to this. They've been sending to me their proposed tenants' rights, which are now up to about, I think, 3 pages long with a variety of different things. And as I said, the most recent one that I reviewed had to deal with the smoke and carbon monoxide, you know, where they have to be, who has to put them in, who's responsible. And I've worked on what they're doing because what the landlord tenant council has given me sort of a generic list of things that people should, what tenants are responsible and are not responsible for. And that also comes down to a lease, because you know you could have a lease that actually puts certain responsibilities on the tenant, which in many other cases are the landlord's responsibility. So this is we're working on the language there. I think that though is much closer to having something that they want, because they want to get it out. They want to get it on the website. They want to be able to basically, not in a sense, publish that out. This would just be, you know, I think more of an extension of that. But it's
So
not-
so what validates this tenant bill of rights? Like what makes these actual rights? Whatever their list is, their 3 pages.
well, a few things. For example, smoke and carbon monoxide. That's in the International Fire Code.
Okay. So that's a statute.
That's a statute. With regard to security deposits, that's some are in the lease, but there's also case law which requires, you know, what you have to do with the security deposit. You know, when the landlord has to give it back. Now, in the provision that the landlord tenant council has put in, they say it has to be provided back to you within 30 days. I have to make sure that that is standard, because it may not be. That may be lease specific more than anything else. But there are certain rights that tenants have, just, you know, that are under both law and both case law. That can be there. The code, you know, the International Property Maintenance Code as to what size of the room you must have, and, you know, all things like that. That's New York State code, so that we can, you know, that we can easily put in there, so tenants, you know, can at least know that they're, you know, supposed to, you know, you're not supposed to basically, you know, get into a bedroom through a kitchen or something like that in terms of, you know, how they set that thing up and how your rooms are supposed to be set up. Those kind of things are there. So there's both from what the courts have interpreted as what is a right and an obligation, and also what, you know, we have under both, particularly the state uniform International Building Code, International Fire Code, Property Maintenance Code, and also our own Property Maintenance Code, because our own Property Maintenance Code has certain responsibilities for both landlord, you know, for a tenant and for an owner, in terms of what they must do with regard to, you know, how they maintain their premises. So I think all that needs to be in there so that everyone knows, you know, where they are. From our village code, it's easy. We can just lay it all out.
No further questions.
Questions too. So we have passed different resolutions through the years, and I'm not talking about. I'm just more like a general question, I guess. Where simple example just came to mind while you were talking before. New York State has some regulations that are about minimum standard size for
Correct.
a 1-bedroom. We have our own standards, which are more strict than New York State at that time, and now they're more strict than IBC code. So what is the difference between us making more strict rules and regulations, for example, for this type of resolution that we're looking at this point? As long as it's not less than what is required, it can always be more.
It's home rule, right? Isn't that home rule?
Well,
but what is the difference
we're
between?
talking two different things here.
And that's what I wanted. I wanted
Because
to.
let me say this. If you are looking to make, certain sections of the building code that the state has, if you are looking to deviate from those sections as a municipality, you need to get state approval to do that. You have to go through, as you know, the code division in the state has to approve that. Ossining had to do that many years ago for its sprinkler code, because at that time, Ossining sprinkler code was, I believe, far more stringent than the state's. So, and to get that, you actually, if you in fact go onto the state's website, you will see Ossining there as one of the municipalities. So from a building code perspective, if we wanted to do something that was beyond what the building code requires, we just have to we have to just make an application to the Department of State building code people, and they will, and generally
But
be okay with that.
we are not talking about
Right.
building code. We're talking about leases. So
Right.
what is can we do that? Can
We can't. Well, let me say
require
this:
something then?
if let me answer you this way: if case law says, I like the smile. If case law says that you can't do something, we can't pass something that says you can do it. So if if judges in the appellate court in Brooklyn have said that a tenant does not have the right to do this, or a landlord does not have the right to do that, we could not come back and do that because we would be brought into court and we would lose. We can be consistent with what the state provides in terms of its requirements. That we can certainly do. There's no issue with that. And Omar's correct. To some extent, it becomes a home rule issue as to how far you can go with regard to that. The other issue that I just have to check is, remember, we're a charter village. So a lot of what we have, and not a lot of this is necessarily dealt with in the charter, but it may be to some extent, because our charter comes before the New York State Village Law, because that becomes our really operative document. Only 12 other villages that have the ability to do that. So to that extent, we can go that way. But overall, if there's, use the simplest thing. I mean, if the state has a law that you cannot prohibit someone from speaking about a particular topic, you can't pass a law here and say that they can. You can't, that you're not permitted to do. But you can work within the confines of the state law. With regard to what leases have and what leases don't have. I mean, part of what this means, and I think this goes back to Trustee Bazemore, is what do you say you have a lease, but what are you putting in that lease effectively? Because most of these leases, if you look at them, they're basically generic leases. They have the same paragraphs in the same locations. The first is how much, then they have the term, then they have something about the security deposit, and then they have when the landlord can come in and what they can and cannot do.
So at that within that pad, we can also put minimum criteria, sure, more similar to what EDPA has as a lease standard, so to speak. Because I'm sure their lease here in Austin is the same lease that they have in the Bronx, for example, or White Plains or Yonkers. Does that deviate from that? Do you know?
I have to check. The standard ETPA lease that I've been told is pretty much the same as the lease for other units. The difference is that there's a clause in there that if this is a unit that is subject to the Emergency Tenants Protection Act, the annual rent increase is basically determined by the Westchester Rent County Guidelines Board. That's what's there. And again, it goes back to what Trustee Bazemore was saying. For someone who is in an ETPA unit, they have certain protections in terms of renewals, in terms of eviction, correct, which are explicit in the unconsolidated
Which a standard
laws.
lease would not have that.
Well, no, because those are explicit in the unconsolidated laws, and it's explicit in the rules interpreting ETPA by DHCR. That's there. The question is, can the village essentially graft that on for non-ETPA units, overall? Can you say, you can't do this to these particular tenants, that they can only get renewal, they can only be evicted if they do, there's some particular egregious act, that's not the phrase, but that's what they call it. And that's less clear to me because, again, the state has specifically said that these units specifically have these protections. So that's something I have to look at. I'm still looking at in terms of how far it can go. Again, it's not something, it would be revolutionary because you don't have it elsewhere in the state. And ETPA itself, as you know, is only limited to a small number of counties. Ulster might like to do it. Kingston might love to do it. They just can't because they're simply not covered by it. So that's something, again, to be looked at.
So,
Get those answers for you.
so next week, I think the sense of the board is as much protection as you believe we can legally include in it.
Gotcha.
Give us that, and that'll be where we start from with the draft next week. I do want to address the question that was raised by Trustee Bazemore. Where did this come from? I sat down with every trustee that was willing to have a conversation with me and said, what would you like to accomplish this year? And this was born out of those conversations.
We sat down together too. You didn't mention it.
This wasn't one of the ones that you raised. But there were ones that you raised that we've taken positive action on, correct?
Yeah.
All right.
I did send an email to public record that I would review with someone and get a response back. So
If you'd like me to respond back publicly right now, I can.
Sure.
Your suggestion was that you would meet with me in the
third party.
presence of either the manager or another trustee,
Yeah, for accountability.
which would be either unreasonable or inappropriate because the village manager is our subordinate staff and inviting another trustee to be with us would require public notice and it would be a public meeting.
Stuart, would it be more appropriate to have counsel there? Because that's actually
Also,
pretty,
also staff who is below us.
I was advised, for many reasons that, going forward, a third party should always be present. So that's kind of why I did that email to her. And that's why I do like all memos.
Let me think about it. I'm happy to talk to you offline. I don't want to give you an off-the-cuff answer on that because I literally don't have it.
Okay, all right, cool. But just that, before making that statement, I mean, people need to know the background because that's
I
why.
didn't make a statement about you at all. I said anyone who is willing to meet with me, I'm out.
No, right, and I'm saying that we haven't met because of that one, I don't want to call it an issue, but challenge that we're trying to now get straightened out by corp counsel. Let's see who is the appropriate party that would be appropriate. I mean, called NICOM and they, but then again, they're not always right when it comes to the recommendations. Right? I did receive some counsel that I highly respect, and hopefully, it's not the first board or situation where that's done in Westchester County at the local level. So just FYI.
There's my door is always open. I'm always happy to have a conversation. If that's not going to work, here we are on a Wednesday night.
Agreed.
Next.
I need a
5
break.
minute break.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's do it. And we're back. You didn't miss a moment of the action. So, 80 Main Street.
Yes, so next on the agenda is an update on 80 Main Street and potentially a request to hire our own expert. So I'll once again turn it over to Stuart. It was a new cup of tea.
Which one is this?
I do. As the folks here certainly know, and I think many of the people who are watching.
Stuart, your
I'm
microphone's
sorry.
off. Sorry.
As the folks here know, thank you, Jamie, and the others know, in August, the retaining wall at 60 Main Street collapsed. Well, no, but the wall is at 60. And as a result of that, the building at 80 Main Street, which is the senior apartment complex, has not been opened. It was just set to rent, and actually set to start accepting tenants that weekend, but has not been able to since. Since that time, there have been, and I have been involved in numerous discussions with both the developer and attorneys for 80 Main Street and with the folks involved at 60. In 60, there's a couple of different entities. There is the owner of the property, which is the Homem family. There is the owner of the business that is located there, which is American Pumping, but that is no longer owned by Mr. Holman. It's owned by someone else, and he has his own attorneys. interest of full disclosure, there is a notice of claim that was filed against the Village of Ossining by the owner of the business at 60 Main Street, but nothing's really occurred with that. I think he did it more as a placeholder so he could avoid having a statute of limitations issue, because you have only 90 days to file a notice of claim against a municipality. But what has happened in the interim, and I'll get to the expert retention in a second, but as I mentioned, 80 Main Street is not opened. 80 Main Street has recently submitted plans to the building department to essentially create a platform on the west side of the building, which is the side where the wall came down. The reason that they need that is there's an issue of fire access. That side of the building lost about 26 feet in width of their area. So there is really no ability to get, a ladder, except that the ladder is in fact down at 60 and putting the ladder all the way up. So those plans are with the building department now, but that building remains closed. It recently had a water leak a few weeks back. It started on the second floor, and there was a good amount of water in the basement during that period of time, but the building remains vacant. But I have gotten calls from people saying that there are people living there because they see lights on at night. That's actually the maintenance staff that's there at night. So there is no one living there. I've been assured that by building management. But if anyone does see anything that appears that someone is living there, I would ask you to please notify both the building department and the police department as soon as possible, because there is an order that no one is supposed to be living in that building. But on to the expert issues. The owners for 60 Main Street have had various experts look at the retaining wall, or what's left of the retaining wall, and have made certain conclusions that the cause of the retaining wall collapse was not in the way that the retaining wall was designed, but was related to the construction that was undertaken by 80 Main Street. I say this just as background. I am making no judgment at all because I haven't read any of the reports or seen anything. Their argument is basically that there was digging that was too close to where the wall was. There's water that was permitted to get behind the wall. The wall was not therefore secured, and the wall collapsed. That's 60's argument. 80's argument is obviously different. Their argument is that the wall was properly, that there was a problem. It was a problem with the wall's construction. It was not with regard to them. As you may recall, what was previously at 80 Main Street was the Elks Lodge, which was further set back from where the current building is in terms of the relationship to the wall. What I am, in the process of doing is trying to set up a meeting with all the stakeholders involved, and that would be not just the owners, but their insurance carriers and their attorneys, to sort of work things out and see what's going to happen. At this point, 60 Main Street has not expressed any interest in putting up another retaining wall. Frankly, the wall would probably cost more than the value of the property is right now anyway, and so they're just not interested in doing that. It's unclear what 80 Main Street is going to do once they get past the platform issue. But what I am asking this board is to allow the village to retain its own expert to essentially see, what went wrong and why. I think it's important from the village's perspective to know what was the condition of that wall. The wall, as you know, was only up for about 9 years before it collapsed. It had been signed off by village personnel, and there was a full application that was filed with regard to it. But I think it's quite important that we get an independent view as to what occurred there, because clearly each side from 60 below and 80 above, not surprisingly, one's going to point at the other saying it's someone else's responsibility. And the difficulty is what we have now is we have no wall there. We have winter here. The tarp has all blown off, as you may have all noticed. I have been assured that the building at 80 Main Street is solid and secure, because that building was actually built into the rock, and that has been checked out. But in any event, I think it's important that we know what's there, what happened, and what really is supposed to come next. This is not to say that it's the village that's putting anything up or doing anything. This is private property. I want to make that very, very clear. But I think given what the location is, and given the fact that there is a very large apartment building that lays empty at this time, and we're still not sure when people will get in. I think the village has to know from its own end exactly what occurred and why it occurred, and get recommendations from that. I have called around to a number of engineering firms, and not surprisingly, many of them said no because they were already engaged by one or the other sides in this matter. But I want to thank Joe Tremelli, because he put me in touch with one company who said while they couldn't do it, they would give me the name of somebody else. And they did, and it's this company, Geodesign Incorporated, which is on West 30th Street in New York. I spoke with one of their principals, and he was very interested in it. He estimates that the analysis would cost approximately $20,000 for the village to go there. The portions of the wall that collapsed are still on site at 60. They've not been removed. I can in fact tell you that the trucks that were crushed are still on site at 60. They have not been removed. So it is, and the building at 60 has not been repaired in any way. So everything is essentially as it was back in on August 13th, with the exception that nearly 6 months now have passed, and the two sides are just sort of going as two different ships in the wind. But I think having a report from our end and being able to sit down with all these folks, because to be blunt, there is insurance money out there. Everybody had a lot. Now everybody's going to point at everybody else, but I think we'll all say that it's most likely there should be a wall there, but there should be some arrangement that has to be made. 80 is losing money, to be blunt, because they have an empty building, and it's gone on for a number of months, and they have a large note to pay off. 60 can do nothing at their property right now. It's got crushed rock all over the place, 2 crushed trucks, and a crushed building. So, and anyone who drives, down Lower Main sees that literally every single day. I will say from the building department's perspective, there is obviously some concern that, you get one, you get a lot of bad rainstorms or something, maybe, there'll be more debris coming down, although frankly, to this point, that has not been the case. But as noted, the tarp that was initially put up, I think that lasted probably less than a month, and then it basically, through winds and everything like that, simply tore and came down. Again, getting everyone in the same room, I think, is important, because I'll just say it this way. If it ends up in litigation, this will go on for years, because everyone will be pointing at everybody, and, our children's children, potentially, because this is one of those cases that will just go on. And the only way to do it is to get everybody in a room, which I now have contact information for everyone involved. The attorney for 60 Main was good enough to give me that information. But as I said, I'd like to be able to have someone independent from those 2 entities, or 3 entities if I'm considering the owner of the business, to essentially say this is what we think occurred, and why we think it occurred, and what we think should be done next in terms of that particular area. That's really why I'm coming before you folks, as well as to provide you just with an update what's going on, because I'm sure folks get questions with regard to what's going on at that building. I get questions. News 12 seems to call me once a month to wonder if anyone has moved in, and I keep telling them not yet. But that's that's what it is. I do have a good relationship with both the owners of both buildings, and their attorneys. So I think that's beneficial. But it's 6 months now, and to be blunt, not much has happened. They're really not moving toward a resolution, except, as I said, that the folks at 80 are looking to create some sort of platform system so that they can allow for fire access and reopen the building. And that, I should just point out, in and of itself, whether or not it goes forward, it's a fairly expensive proposition, and that's just a temporary proposition, because it doesn't put up a new wall. What it does is essentially create a platform coming out of the side of the building to allow, firefighters to get in and out of that side of the building if they had to do that. And that's, again, something that's being currently, looked at by the building department. So while that's progress to some extent, it doesn't open the building yet, doesn't deal with 60 Main Street, and doesn't get us to, the root cause of getting the situation resolved, which is really what I think we all want to get done as quickly as possible. So that's my presentation.
So from a legal standpoint, say if we say, hey, here's the 20 grand, you get your study, you bring them into the table, and say you present your information. Legally, and what if they say, we're not buying what you're selling? Like, does the village have any recourse to be able to take both the clients to court? Like
The village, yeah, well, there are a few things, yes. The answer to your question, Trustee Bazemore, is yes. There are things that can be done both under our building code, because there are in fact outstanding orders to remedy with regard to 60 Main Street. Because the order to remedy, I believe, to them was that they had to actually repair, essentially replace the wall. And they've, their indication to me is that they're not going to do that. They have no intention of replacing the wall. But in terms of a lawsuit essentially claiming that someone has to do that, the answer is we can go into court and do that. We can get a court to compel them to do that, to make that repair. What our code provides is that if we require something to be, and in this case the wall would have to be demolished to basically be rebuilt, we'd need to get an engineer, such as this kind of engineer, to provide a report. That report is presented to the court in White Plains, not the court here in Ossining. And that court, after reviewing that, can then issue a determination that, yes, village, you're correct. You, Mr. Owner, you must proceed and basically fix what is there. So this would not only help me in those discussions, but it would be a report that we could use, when were we to have to go into litigation on it.
Okay.
So I'm going to sort of play back in my own way some of the things you've said. I see no incentive for these people to come to conclusion, because it's now 2 insurance companies or more arguing with probably 3.
Actually
4, okay. So there's a lack of incentive. If we do what I don't want to do is insert ourselves as another party in this, because it's not it's between a business and 2 owners.
I should point out that we are already a party in a notice.
Well,
of claim.
but anybody can, as we know, can go after us. I mean, and people do every day and threaten us every day. It doesn't mean they have a case. It just means.
No, but you, what I'm just saying is we're in a sense, we're a party whether we like it or not.
Okay, but the purpose of this is not just an analysis. The purpose of this is to put some parameters around. I mean, my hope is that we can sort of force someone's hands to say, this can't go on for 3 generations of our
Exactly right.
children. You've got 4 years, or we're going to take action of some sort. We could take over the properties under whatever. We could force them to do X, Y, and Z. So that's the purpose, is to have leverage for that, not to study and figure out who did what to whom. I mean, it's a terrible situation. We've all driven by there. But for sure it's not the fault of the 1,000 commuters we have. We have to look at that every day, or the next big storm where the stuff goes. They're maintaining the properties, right? It looks pretty clean. So that's another.
60's being maintained, 80 is now being maintained because they have a.
Okay,
they hired
so they're
someone.
maintaining it, they're securing it, but we have to force some parameters on behalf of the village, because, I mean, really, we don't need yet one more thing that goes on for 60 to 70 to 80 years that we discussed earlier on this agenda. We want to get things resolved, right? Okay. So that's the goal of the $20,000 retained experts to come up with something.
Yes.
Okay. Okie dokie.
So you have 2 parties, two private parties, and now 4 insurance companies.
Correct.
one of them refuses to, is already violating village policy by not adhering to their OTR.
Correct.
And the blame game is going on, right? What can you remind me what happens when a person refuses to comply with an OTR?
It gets turned into an appearance ticket and results in an appearance in the justice court.
Okay.
So that will be, that's what we'll follow.
And to your point, and Trustee Levin's point was totally valid, us basically gifting $20,000 of taxpayer money to a private project would help alleviate or potentially alleviate or help them come to a consensus, but not guaranteed. I mean, I just want to make sure that
I don't think that would be not what I said. The 20,000, I don't think I would ever use those words, but I think what I said was it would help him, on behalf of the village, force some hands.
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, so, but essentially, it's just to push them because the way that we have been pushing them hasn't been enough, and
But let me just so I can clarify. The report would also have a benefit that if we wanted to go to court to compel them to make certain, to take the wall down to whatever, and then to do a repair, our code requires that we have a report from an engineer to present to a judge for that. And, you know, it's how our code's written. So, you know, actually, and I should say, that's how most codes are written, most local codes are,
Right.
to get that. So that's.
you're prepping us. You're prepping us in case we actually have to do it. That we're thinking. I just think it's a shame that the public has to use their money for a private dispute. Maintenance. I'm glad to know that they're doing some maintenance. It's clearly not aesthetic maintenance. I don't understand why they're allowed to keep a crumbling wall that sometimes falls onto the street with a small little fence. I don't understand why they keep a truck that's half burnt. I mean, there's ways that we could, you know, in the meantime, put a humongous fence that we can't see it, or, you know, replace your plastic. I mean, they're clearly not working with the village at all.
Well, the negotiations to get the plastic put up were, as Debbie knows, went on for weeks. Because they couldn't, 80 Main Street could not put the plastic up from their own property. They had to get access through 60 Main Street. And we had to sort of broker that because they're just, so it's, they're on two sides of a fence at this point. But you're right, it's a private dispute, but I should also just point out that if in the event the village is ever made a party to a case, not just through the notice of claim,
Right.
but actually named as a party to the case, you'll want to have your own expert anyway. And that's where this would potentially come in. But that's down the road, but I'm just saying it's sort of protection in that regard.
You know, no, I trust
I
your
got you.
your advisement on this, and I support
No,
your
you're
advisement
right.
on this. I just wanted to put on the record that there's two entities
And they're private parties. You're 100%, this is not village property at all.
that want to be our neighbors and business people in Ossining, and this is how they're treating the village and how we operate in our rules and policies here. That's
I
all.
got you. I got you.
Where's the money coming from?
Somewhere.
I'll have to discuss that with my friend, Mr. Treasurer.
Did you want to comment on anything, Trustee Quezada?
I hate this.
I mean, I guess you guys have a little bit more information than I do. I only know what I have seen and from what I heard. Anyway, can we create like an escrow account where we don't have to pay? It's very similar to what, you know, the building of, I should say, planning department does. Can we do that at all instead of, I mean, I have no problem getting expert. I mean, in the past, we have hired experts to do stuff, because I recall, but I never recall paying $20,000.
Well, the difference here, though, is that in a planning situation, let's use Hidden Cove as an example. We have retained consultants, and money has been put into escrow. But here, they're the village consultants, but we would, in essence, be asking the owners of 60 and 80 to basically pay the village to do that. In the case of the planning board, they have an application pending before the planning board.
And we're doing this voluntary. We don't have to do this.
We are not obligated to do it. 100% correct. I'm just viewing it as a, if you want to call it, insurance.
Caution, yeah.
Yeah, and the reality is, we've got these highly visible properties in our downtown that are right now not positively contributing to our economic development, to housing needs, to business needs. It's all downside for us, and if there's some role that the village can play in moving this forward faster and/or protecting ourselves in the case of the potential future litigation questions, then it seems like money wisely spent, and we didn't do it right away. We certainly waited to see, it's been 6 months, to see if this was a wise course of action, and so I think I'm hearing generally that Stuart, most of the board is supportive of this money that we're not interested in spending, but recognizing.
Unhappily supportive of this,
Yes.
annoyingly supportive.
I
of this.
appreciate that. Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, the next is
Next
my
up is
request.
Mayor Garrity.
So I've spoken a little bit, and I circulated an email with an example of a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that exists. One case study from Decatur, Georgia, and we haven't talked very much about how it could be beneficial to our community. I thought it might be a good idea to establish a subcommittee with a couple of us from the board and members of the community to explore if and how this might be valuable and establish what might be the mission for a committee of this kind. And I'd like the support of the board to establish this subcommittee. And a volunteer.
I'm supporting this. I'm not going to volunteer, but I trust some of the members of the board with helpful in that request. But I think it's something that.
Manny, somehow he's not here.
Sorry about that. I'm supporter of this. I will not volunteer. I have a couple other stuff going on with other committees and stuff like that I'm part of it. So I'm definitely supporter of this. I think it's a great opportunity to engage our community in a different way that we haven't done in years past. So, yeah, I think it's going to be something good and something that is going to be helpful for Austin, for the village of Austin. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say I personally, and as a trustee, I think it's really hard for a community to, for whatever reason or what caused it, to say that when it comes to diversity and equity and inclusion, there are challenges that we face here in Ossining, and that we want to address it and be better and find a way to really be a community for all, not just currently, but as we go forward. I support the idea. I read the article, which was nice, but I still don't really get the scope or even what the scope of the committee will be. And then personally, what I did, because where is it? Because I read the article, which is actually a pretty good article. But I was always taught, at least when I first started at Lynn, when I went to the Academy for Leadership in Boca, was those three words. You never. This may be a philosophical difference or just a different model, but that you never put diversity, inclusion, and equity together because they're so separate and they're so different. So I actually had the definitions today that I learned from that model and that program. So diversity is the presence of a difference from within. Inclusion is individuals with different identities, and for them to feel valued and leveraged and welcomed in like a particular given setting. And then equity, which is, I'm pretty strong on, is the approach that assures everyone access to the same opportunities, but it recognizes the current advantages and barriers that exist. So what we already did, I think is great, huge, is that we acknowledge that we have unequal practices and we're trying to address imbalances and identify what those are. So that was just good for me to get a refresher on, because I do feel that those three are different. And I wouldn't lump them all into one, because there are many areas that fall into diversity, and there's many areas that fall into inclusion, many people that fall into all three, only some. So I'm still at the learning stage as to how to go about that. But I'm definitely, from up here, I'm definitely supportive. I usually don't support like a committee unless I know like what it's gonna do.
Right, which is, yeah, I think that's what I was hearing from anybody that had spoken with it, is what exactly is the mission, what's the point, and I don't have a firm feeling on what the title of it needs to be and exactly what words need to be in it, which is why at this point I'm just suggesting a subcommittee to figure that out, what's going to work best for us.
So I actually read the little article, but I also clicked. There's like a whole booklet that goes with it, and how the community actually decided to, similar to what we did with the housing needs assessment. You get a whole bunch of people in a room. People have their slew of issues. They've identified key issues, and then they broke it down into individual, organization, and then government. So I guess, what is the target audience? Because again, that community received an award, right, for the process, but as far as that particular community actually making those goals or making that thing happen, they've yet to do that. I mean, it was a nice gesture. So are we looking, is this a process of looking at community engagement and how we engage the public, or is this something that when we pass laws, like you're going to go before this committee, and if this committee says, oh, this law, this practice, or this policy doesn't meet this particular criteria, are we looking for recommendations? I mean, I kind of want to understand just the thought process and what you envision, because you bring this model to us as which is vastly different from what other communities do. Other communities, they'll do, African Americans, Latinx, LGBTQ, right? They do all these different things, and it's a way where different, typically, I don't want to speak for Yonkers, but what I've seen is like the African American board, they may do certain events throughout the year to celebrate, heritage or whatever the case may be. So I just kind of want to understand the thought process, because you also mentioned this in your inaugural address. So I just want to know what was going on in Mayor Garrity's head.
Sure. Yeah, and one of the things I said in my inaugural address, I'll expand on a little bit. So every time we try to do community outreach, whether it's open office hours or, the people who usually come to our meetings or send us emails or reach out with questions and concerns or respond to surveys, are not an accurate reflection of who our community is. If we are going to embark on the comprehensive plan, is going to be a big focus for us this year. And we know that when we did the housing needs assessment, as much as we tried to engage the community and to have diverse voices, it was disproportionately skewed to older, whiter, and wealthier people and it was not an accurate representation of who our community is. Though I know that there was a lot of effort made to try and reach out and have a more global engagement. And frankly, I think every time that the government is making these decisions on how to do outreach, we're falling short. And I'm told by people time and again, you're just not going to get those kind of answers. You're just not going to get that kind of engagement. And so this is my suggestion for how we can reach out to the community and say, how we really do want to hear from you. We really do want you to be engaged. Your voice really matters in our community. How can we engage better with you in our community? And that would include something along that you've talked about a lot, which would be a language access policy, or what are our practices? We know technology can do some of it, but if we don't have any meetings for the comprehensive plan that are actually conducted entirely in Spanish, then if we choose to do that, that's a very different message than if we just provide Spanish translation for things after the fact. So those are examples of things that might be recommended by a committee, but that's where I come from because I'm a mayor. I'm in municipal government. The point is to have a committee that is driven by community members who are experiencing or have experienced a sense that they have been underrepresented or not felt welcomed and included in government in the past.
So, for the example you gave, if we know that we want to if we know that there are people who speak Spanish, there are Spanish speakers, and there's some Portuguese and there's some Italian, do we set up a committee to then recommend to us to do a language access program, or do we do it?
Do we already have all the answers? Because if we do, we should have been implementing everything already. And we should be doing better.
So is that going to be the next conversation on our work session about language access?
I mean, just because we're on it, and I've been working on the draft for a year with like many stakeholders, I'm not ready to bring it to the board. I've spoken to Debbie about it a lot, and the board will be the first entity to have a draft of the language access policy, and will be the board to approve or lack thereof, or change, or really choose whether they want to pursue it or not. But what you just said sounds to me like, which is a great idea, is you want to focus on involvement and retention. Those two areas that
What do you mean by retention?
So how do you get people involved who really aren't involved, but how do you keep them involved, right? Because we already know that there's a certain group that's always involved already, right? So, and they're not going anywhere, clearly. So how do we get the few people that we have to continue to either apply to a committee, or come to village board meetings, or whatever opportunity we have as a municipality for them to get involved in? That's how I interpreted that. And that need that you just said is not wrong, because I agree. The equity, diversity part of it, that's like more, to me, policy-driven, more expert-driven, requires a bit more time to really, to me, it's more, how do you develop, at least as an elected official, the first part is how do I use that information to develop policy, and what policy is necessary, what are stuff that's not a policy, that's just a procedure or a culture that we have in a department or in a program. I mean, that's specifics on how to actually go into a particular word or weakness that we have. But what I heard was more how to better get the whole community involved, instead of just the ones that we know get involved normally because of whatever factors. And how do we keep them, right? Because we may be able to get, right now, if I say, as I'm going to do soon, I want a Hispanic Heritage Day parade, right? I may be able to get 100 people on a committee for that, right? But then they'll probably go away after, right? So how do we do that, and why do they get involved, right? What was the outreach? What are their interests? Also, an analysis where, including of myself, of where have we fallen short, and why have we fallen short, and how is our outreach? Why is it that it's always the same 40 people? We had a big conversation about the comprehensive plan, about how before we announce, what's going to come next and all that, that we really need to have a full action plan on how we're going to make sure that everyone even knows that we're accepting applications, that everyone even understands the current comprehensive plan that we currently have. So this is, I don't mean to go on so much, but this is such an, three areas that are so important and have so many factors within each one, that it's just for me not that easy to just.
Okay, so Trustee Herrera, you've thought about this a lot.
Yes.
Would you please serve on a subcommittee to figure out how and if we should move forward?
For involvement and retention, yes. For the purposes of that, yes.
I'm not sure exactly what that means, but if you're agreeing to serve on the subcommittee, then we can start with that.
So it wouldn't be a subcommittee on diversity, equity, inclusion. It would be a subcommittee on involvement and retention.
Of what? I mean,
Well,
involvement and retention
There's
is.
only one way that a resident can be involved in government, right? And that's through either our boards, our committees, our initiatives, our programs, right? So how to attract our meetings.
It's more than that.
our
I mean,
meetings.
that.
There's really, right? I mean, am I missing more, right? There's boards, committees, events.
Just sending an email, just calling the village. I mean, there are some people really know.
Well, that's
that
community organizing. That's separate. See what I mean? That's a whole separate thing.
It's about the government being open and welcoming to all, and for everyone to be engaged at whatever level they may need or want to be.
That's access. That's separate.
Okay, so.
You see what I mean? No. But
Okay, okay. Do you want to be on this committee?
I don't. 'Cause I don't think. I don't. All due respect, I don't think you have a clear understanding, or we have a clear understanding as to why they're so different and why they have to really be thought out well before you just dive into a committee.
That's why we'd have a subcommittee to establish what the committee may or may not be able to accomplish.
That's discussing 3 separate areas all at once. And I mean, this is pretty sensitive, especially for Ossining. I'm not against it. I'm just saying it's hard.
Okay. I honestly, I've just read it so differently. So you have an idea that more people need access. I don't think it's just about boards. I think that what you said in the inaugurate, in your speech, I'm getting tired, sorry. I got called into jury duty today. I had to be there at like 7:30. I'm like, I feel like I've been in these kind of paneled walled rooms all day, all night. So you want to set up a subcommittee to figure out how to reach more people, not only through their representative government, but more people across socioeconomic levels that would give you a more diverse group of people to understand what goes on in informing us about what needs to get done and how to get things done. Is that what the purpose of it is?
It could be.
Right.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
big part of it, yeah.
Okay. So the words are problematic because you sort of came up with these words. I'm not sure that we should get stuck on the words because I think that you just had to call it something. But you want a subcommittee to actually define how do we reach more people? How do people reach us more? Is that sort of the sum of this
That's
whole-
where I come to it from.
Okay, that's what you're
But
looking
the
to do.
committee does not yet exist, so the committee could clarify the mission, and it could be slightly different than that, or some vastly different from that.
Okay, but really,
That's how I came to it.
respectfully, he or she who wants a subcommittee is going to have to sort of say, this is what I'd like done, and then the subcommittee is going to be driven by that. So diversity committees have been set up in corporations since the early 90s. This is not, I mean, I ran that for like years for Chase. This is not like rocket science once you define what you want to do. I think some of the words become a little tricky. A subcommittee, can be set up that drives this, and other people can take over from there once the subcommittee sort of says this is sort of the first few steps. But the key to this all is the mission, which should be, if you want to reach more people who are diverse across socioeconomic, race, gender, whatever the definition is, to hear what's going on in government and to be involved. I mean, even something to me, when we do studies, our vendors sit there and start through all the minutia of how do we reach people. Each and every time it goes through the whole storyline. How do we reach them? Where are they? Da-da-da-da. What hours of the day? Weekends? And you can alleviate that by having a subcommittee actually form and say, one of the ways you reach all people is through the following. Language is just one piece of it, frankly. How you get communications out, et cetera, let people know. So is the purpose here to get more information from a wider scope of people in a two-way street? Is that like your sort of vision?
That was my vision.
Okay.
All I'm asking for right now is not to establish a standing committee, but is to, if 3 of us can agree, that we can appoint a subcommittee to more clearly define what might be a wise path going forward, more than just reading an article and clicking on a few links. That's what I'm asking for tonight. And I don't think that at 11 o'clock at night, with more items on our agenda and executive session, we're going to really
Right.
figure anything further out right now.
I think
Is
you
there
have support
support?
and no volunteers, basically,
Yes,
is what you're
that's what it sounds
getting.
like.
Good idea, but I don't want to be involved, is what's being said here.
Yeah, I'm not going to touch
For
it
this.
because the more you talk about it, it seems more like we're focusing on communication. That's the way I'm interpreting it, and which is just definitely different from what the title that is here clearly stated is different from the link. It's different from sort of what they've done in that community. And if it's about communication, do I think we need to set up a subcommittee to discuss communication on how government actually communicates with its residents? I don't know. We've had a lot of conversations in the last 3 years about how we should communicate and what platforms we had. Again, I'll never forget my sidewalk, right? So, is it about technology? Yes, we had my sidewalk.
It's up there, actually. So can we table this because it's getting
Yeah.
really late?
Yeah.
Table, wait. All I want to do is establish a committee to have a conversation. That's what it is. If nobody wants to volunteer for it, I will volunteer, and I'll see if there are people in the community who want to do it, and I know there are, because they have already come to me. When I talk about it as a mayor. These are the frustrations that I have. These are the things I want to find solutions for. But I am not trying to find all of the solutions because I am just a single person. I would like to have a committee of people in our community who can do it better than government can figure out how to do it. That's the point. I want a subcommittee to help figure out what could be a mission of a committee. If nobody here wants to volunteer, that's fine. I volunteer myself. Will you support me establishing a subcommittee with members of the community?
So I hear Manny said you're supporting this?
I definitely am supporting, and I'm just confused because, sorry, Omar, it's pretty much, I'm hearing what you said, and I'm hearing what Mayor Garrity is saying, and it's pretty much almost the same. Is there some definitions that you probably have different understanding? So, in concept, you say you agree. Concept, looking out from up here. And something that I have heard through the past year, talking to some of the members of the board here, is the frustration about communication and how do we engage to the community, how do we, this all access language and stuff like that. So by me going through this website, reading this information, doing some additional research and what other municipalities, what other cities or villages have something very similar to this, it comes down to, it is communication, but it's also engagement to the community. How do we engage that community to keep through the years, not just through that project, not just through that month, not just through that event. So there's a lot of the stuff that, we're
retention.
So correct. No, and I agree with you. That's what I'm saying. I agree with you with a lot of the stuff that you're saying, and I'm not saying that you should be working with a subcommittee if you don't want to. That's not my intent. But what I'm saying is, that's our goal as individuals. We have that goal. We have an individual goal to accomplish things, to see our community to be better. You brought some translators to a few of the meetings the past year. What was that for? Sure, it was to engage that community for that particular event. So how do we do more than that? How do we advise? And how do we do as a government body? How do we engage that part? And we keep engaging that community. So I think, going back to what Mayor Garrity said was, the title of this could change. It doesn't have to be that. It could be it could be morphed to something different than what we're sitting down and talking about it, or maybe tabling for another time. I don't know. But again, this 80% or 90% of this board has talked about this for a year now, and we have talked about this for at least 4 years now. So it's like, how do we go forward? Sure, how do we move forward? I'm supporter of this.
I
The
am
name
too,
could
if
be
you wanna do it.
totally different. It could be a different name. It could be a different statement
Absolutely.
that comes in. But I think it's essential for us to, as a community, to move forward to the next level. And what is the next level? We don't know that. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen, in a year from now, or 2 years, or 5 years from now. I don't know that. But what we know is, if we put a guidelines to this, if we put some sort of goals, we know where we're going to go for. Sure, what we're working for. So
Thank
I'm
you.
supportive of this.
Thank
Okay,
you. It sounds like
so-
we have 3 people who are supportive of establishing a subcommittee. I will appoint members to the subcommittee and let everybody know, and report out as there is progress. Okay. Comprehensive Plan Committee, speaking of committees that people can volunteer for.
Right. So I don't have a whole lot to report because the board established the committee, but then Tracy was on vacation and Jamie was on vacation and I was on vacation, so we're all back now. And what I think we should do is put together those pieces that we talked about as far as how we want to do our announcement for how to get involved. And then I'd like to run them by you. And then once we get, everybody thinking that we're saying the right things, we'll just post them online and we'll start getting some applications in. So,
Okay. I mean, I just feel like we established it, and has anybody reached out and said, I want to be on the comprehensive
so I have a
plan?
couple people that have said they do, and I've been out talking to people in the community too.
Yeah.
But I said, wait until it's posted online, and that way you can put your application in.
Okay.
But it shouldn't take us very long to put it together and just get the wording that everybody's comfortable with when we put it out.
Less is more, perhaps.
I agree.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I actually probably disagree. I think most of us, if I have to try to explain to someone what a comprehensive plan is, it's hard to explain it in layman's terms, right? So I would say that, I don't know if less is more, but making sure that we really describe what this plan can do,
Right.
what the possibilities are in ways, that one can understand it.
I agree.
So I think
And I think the message should be not through the technical talk that we usually use. It's through the, what people will understand.
So we just had a whole conversation about engagement. So, so with that in mind, so is it just like, hey, we send out the words and then we put it on the website, or is it we do an info session
So
to the public?
info, that's an interesting idea. So originally it was going to be, we'll put out a news flash that it's coming and we'll put it online so people can start to advertise, or not advertise, but to apply for the position. But yeah, that's info commercial is an
Right, like
interesting
something
concept.
I mean, at one time you had mentioned a town hall, right? Like to me,
Yeah.
this is something that you do a town hall for, right? Like,
good idea.
Yeah,
like, that's what you do.
absolutely. That's a great idea.
It'll be a village hall.
Village hall.
Yes,
correct.
village
Village Hall.
A community meeting, an info session
Okay.
about the comprehensive plan. Can we find
Okay.
out about availability, the Bedar Theater for any Wednesdays coming up? And we are. Would that replace a work session? Ideally.
Would it?
I
Would
don't know.
I don't know.
It doesn't have to.
Listen,
Well, okay, that's a good question.
this is a long
But-
agenda.
I know. Well, it's the first
So,
one of the year.
Mayor
It's the first
Garrity?
one
Also
of the year.
January.
It's the
We
first
could
one of the year.
also do,
Oh, well, I was hoping we
thanks.
could take the 30th off. but-
Yeah. I don't know. Listen, we gotta leave at 5.
Yeah, I don't know why you said that either. Who are you?
I thought that,
You were not on mic, so nobody else heard it. We don't know what you said.
I thought we did write something up, and I thought that I saw it and had,
we just have to finish making the
Okay.
little tweets. And then we have to write the piece that we're going to actually put, asking people to apply.
okay. I'm just going to say it flat out, sooner rather than later. As
Absolutely.
far as I'm concerned, this thing should have been done last year, the comprehensive plan. So all of this is great. We've done comprehensive plans before. Other communities have done it. We're not the first ones to do it. People can Google comprehensive plans, as I did, and 15 will show up in all languages. So sooner, better, more meetings, delays things. So I want to, get this going. It's a very timely thing. We budgeted for it. And I know the wheels of government move slowly, but I really would, this is not new. Not a new item. And we've done it in this community as well. And there are still people around who remember that, so.
I hear you.
So,
My personal opinion, I'm not speaking for anybody else, don't misunderstand, just
Sure.
my personal opinion.
well, but I think you're both right. I think it's not that complicated to put something simple up on the website and put out a statement in the news, and also to have an info session, preferably before we close the application process, so that many more people have been reached
Sure.
and understand why they might want to apply. But anybody who's interested now should, we said it's there, and right now there's, all we did was say it in a public meeting and establish it, but then you can't act on it yet, and that's what I'd like to
We'll get right on
rectify.
it.
Yeah, so we discussed this last time and we decided to hold off on it just because we identified, one thing, we identified that we don't want it to just be an e-blast and an email. And it's great that now we have a consensus for a town hall that we'll get out on our own and through other outlets. Our village hall community meeting, whatever we're going to call it.
Village info session.
But I still don't have a clear understanding of what the marketing and or the model and or approach will be to get the people that we know we're not going to get. So like we already acknowledged that we normally only get those people. Great, they'll apply. But I still don't understand how for this we're going to go into accepting applications without understanding how people knew about it, or if they even understood why they should know about it, or what is the comprehensive plan. So like what I would do usually in a marketing campaign is usually education's first. So you give them a reason to care, you give them a reason to buy in, then you ask them, take a leadership role in it, or consider being part of it. Now it looks like we're still just going to the e-blast and now a meeting, and that's it.
No, so I hear exactly what you're saying. I don't have it tonight, but we would put together a comprehensive way that we're going to reach out to people and so that they know.
Yeah. Sounds good.
And you can have input into that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So if you know how to
Put the
do
list
this,
together,
then
send it to
you can help
everybody,
her
and
out.
if you have ideas,
When do you think you'll be able to do that?
by next week, it'll be done.
Next week, like the end of the week, or like the middle?
Yeah,
I'm
by,
just-
by next week. I mean, there's still some projects that we are working on right now, so
Okay.
we're going to commit to that
Next week.
next week.
Thank you, Debbie.
And as soon as I
Thank
have a better date, I'll email you. Thank you. Okay, next on our agenda is Stuart Kahan for a resolution calling for a public hearing declaring regulation of rents does not serve to abate the housing emergency.
Well, hello, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome back, Stuart.
Hi. Thank you. Okay, this is let me background. When the housing emergency was declared on September 5th, the resolution included the following resolved paragraph. Resolved that the provisions of this resolution shall continue in full force and effect until the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining declares by resolution that the aforementioned emergency is at an end in accord with New York Unconsolidated Laws, Section 8623B, which provides, quote, "The local governing body of a city, town, or village having declared an emergency pursuant to subdivision A of this section may at any time, on the basis of the supply of housing accommodations within such city, town, or village, the condition of such accommodations, and the need for continuing regulation, and the control of residential rents within such municipality, declare that the emergency is either wholly or partially abated, or that the regulation of rents pursuant to this act does not serve to abate such emergency, and thereby remove one or more classes of accommodations from regulation under this act. The emergency must be declared in an end once the vacancy rate described in subdivision A of this section exceeds 5%. The topic for tonight, and I've sent to you folks a proposed call for a public hearing, would be a resolution to call for a public hearing. The public hearing would actually be on the 6th of February, 2019. Thank you, Jamie. And what it would be would to essentially follow the language that I just quoted, which is provided in the unconsolidated laws, and that's the section that deals with the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. The institution, the declaration of the housing emergency, or a declaration declaring the end of a housing emergency, both require a public hearing on at least 10 days' notice. This would be more than 10 days' notice. As we discussed when we were discussing ETPA a number of months back, if the vacancy rate exceeds 5%, then ETPA must end. We're not that's not the basis for this resolution, because there's no indication that there's a vacancy rate that exceeds 5%. But it would be more that the board is making a determination that that essentially there is no further emergency, or that the particular rent regulations will not do not sufficiently resolve any that the rent stabilization does not resolve the issues that led to the initial declaration of a housing emergency. So that's what this resolution is. It would just start a process to effectively, and say it simply, undo the September 5th resolution. And that's what's here. And I have it for you folks, and there it is.
I wanted to ask about the date, please. Why February? You said February when?
February
For
6th would be
public-
the public hearing,
Why not sooner?
because our next meeting is January 16th,
Okay.
and our next, we don't have another meeting until the first legislative meeting in February.
Our next legislative session is the 16th, next week.
Right, but we would, at the 16th, you have a resolution to call for a public hearing.
So you call for a public meeting on the 16th.
And you
You
hold the
open-
public hearing on the 6th. You have to do it on at least 10 days' notice.
Oh, I see. I'm trying to figure out the math. It must be really late.
And the
Okay.
reason, and otherwise,
Got it.
so time-wise, because even.
got it.
So that's just the way it works out, and then you go from there. But you're obligated by the code to have a public hearing for, as I said, either declaring it, or declaring the housing emergency, or terminating the housing emergency. That's in subsection C of section 8623.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else want to comment?
Sure. Have you called the state about this? I mean, in order for us to, even me as a trustee, to like determine whether a housing emergency still exists, would have to do another study.
No.
Right? I mean,
No, you don't.
so we could just assume that it's gone?
It is, again, what the code provides is simply that basically is either, and I'll read it again, because that's what 86, let me find it here. The local governing body of the city or town having declared an emergency, it's their determination, they can declare that the emergency is either wholly or partially abated, or that the regulation of rents pursuant to this act does not serve to abate such emergency, and thereby remove one or more classes of accommodations from regulations under this act. So it doesn't require another study. In the cases where this particular section of the code is applied, it has generally been used where you're arguing that it's above 5%. The Lido Beach cases that I mentioned a number of months ago from out on Long Island are the most recognizable of those. And if there is a study that would show it's above 5%, then ETPA is terminated, or at least the municipality has to do its own study to see if it is or is not. But you don't have to use a vacancy rate as the basis for determining whether or not ETPA has concluded. I haven't checked with the state, but the code is very clear. It's not the state which is the one that makes the determination here. As it was the municipality that starts it, it's the municipality that can end it. So it really rests with the local governing body, the Board of Trustees. It doesn't give any role to DHCR with regard to that.
So even though we paid for 2 vacancy studies, we could undo it with no facts or figures, or we could just do it just because we want to.
You could make the board could make a determination that that the emergency is wholly or partially abated, or that the regulation of rents does not serve to abate the emergency.
So that's a yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
the answer is a yes. They can
No
do that.
facts, no figures, no.
Well,
experts, no.
that's right. It's a determination by the board. Correct. They may do this, and that's the purpose of, I guess, the public hearing as well. So no, it does not go into, again, since you're not going on the basis that it's in excess of 5%, a specific vacancy or new vacancy study is not required, or any other study is not required.
So when I get 514 phone calls tomorrow morning, how do I explain this in one sentence? What does this do if it's passed?
Well, what this would do, well, if the public hearing is passed, or the ultimate resolution. is
Ultimate
passed.
resolution.
If the ultimate resolution is passed, it would mean that the village has made a declaration that the housing emergency is at an end, and that the provisions of ETPA are not applicable within the Village of Ossining for units with buildings of 6 or more units completed prior to January 1st, 1974.
So it would stop the implementation in all of ETPA because that's what ETPA is.
It would stop the implementation of ETPA.
Yeah.
It would stop the scree and dree as applies to ETPA,
We
which
just
is what
voted
was
on,
our most,
yes.
which was our most recent local law, I think 8 or 9 of 9 of 2018. That is correct. It would basically stop that process.
Comments from others? Stuart, screen and was just mentioned. You and I had spoken about, is there,
That's something I'm looking into, is whether or not there can be a local component of that, which basically falls outside of the real property tax law. And I'll be able to answer that question for you. I'm looking at that one right now. But the screen and that we passed, this board passed, was based upon ETPA.
Well,
So
it's an ETPA program. I mean,
that's right. So if
have it
you,
currently done, yeah.
because in fact, it was based upon the real property tax law provision, which specifically references ETPA. So that's something we'll have to deal with.
So you're going to be looking to see if we could do something
A local
comparable
component to it.
that has local, and not only for things built before, units before 1974, but potentially for all units.
Where there would be either someone over the
Right.
particular age, and you'd be able to set your own income level.
Wait,
Right.
Ron, are we talking about a prospective new piece of legislation or policy now, or what?
Well, I think what Trustee Levin and the mayor were asking about is, if the resolution were to, if this resolution is proposed here were to ultimately succeed, the local law 9 of 2018, which adopted scree and dree, would have to fall.
Right.
So the question is there an ability to pass what would be essentially a local component and even expand that to not just pre-1174 buildings and things like that, and perhaps put a different income level? Because remember, I think we had it at $50,000, and if the state raised it, it went up, state lowers it, it goes down. So that's something I have to look at.
So I just want to understand, you're going to be looking to see if you can get a local screen dree. You're also going to be looking at what kind of parameters you can put in leases. All right, so at the end,
Have a paralegal.
all right. So what I'm trying to understand, are you trying to find, essentially, with the again, this was just put on the agenda today, 3:00. So with these two, with the leasing, and the screen dree, and trying to find a local solution, are you basically trying to find a local way to do ETPA? Is that it? Actually, I should ask the three board members.
well, considering that ETPA, while we do have a number of apartments that are eligible, but it's not most of the tenants in Ossining.
So no, so
It's a state program.
So-
So the goal would be, how can we do a better job in Ossining for Ossining community members?
so
To help
yes,
more people in our community.
yes, no. So you're trying to find a local way to implement ETPA outside of the state program. Would that be accurate?
I am interested, and I will only speak for myself, in having as much tenant protection and affordability in our community for all tenants as possible.
This is like a repeat of 2 years ago.
I suppose it is.
Yeah, I mean,
Point out.
yeah. Just so I just want a point of clarification. This is
Point out.
this is a repeat of 2 years ago.
Here we go. Yeah.
We did a subcommittee, right? So we talked about quality of life issues.
And then we had a $50,000 housing needs assessment.
Uh huh.
And for a year, we ignored it. And now we're going back and paying attention to it and following it.
Okay. Listen, I just wanted to see what the layout of the land was.
Well, all I will say is, Stuart, thank you so much. I did not know about what it meant. I found out in an email last minute. I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know what, so thank you, because I actually have a full understanding of it, and I could do my due diligence tomorrow, regardless of where anyone stands on this issue. I guess what is most disappointing to me is that, tomorrow we'll start year 3.0 of Ossining getting divided, going to their one spot, going to the other spot. just this time being led by the board, I guess, in a different way, which is fine. That's how it works. But I really was, even someone who lost the prior election, was really trying to, work with everyone and heal, and part of our equity concerns, diversity concerns, inclusion concerns, are testament to actions like this, right? This is all political will. But we're gonna have a interesting couple of weeks and months, I see. So let's get some good rest, and I will see you all tomorrow.
So Stuart, my final question: are you going to have all your research done by February 6th? Before the public hearing?
You mean, and before the public hearing? Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'll have it to you well before that.
Okay. Like all of it, like the leasing, the local screenery.
You know what you want?
The leasing and the local screenery,
Yeah,
those are pieces of legislation that have to move on parallel paths, but.
So here it is. If you're proposing that you're going to do something the local way, right? But then you snatch what works, what's currently working. This is like, there's a term I'm looking for. I can't think of the term, but you're dressing something up. I don't want to call it deception, but we've sat in this room and we've talked about a local way and trying to find a local solution. We sat up there on the subcommittee. We came up with 5 recommendations, right? We know there are limitations to the real property laws here in New York State. So if you are going to get into a meeting and basically say, hey, I'm going to snatch ETPA away, but we're going to work on something legislatively, and we really haven't figured it out yet, but we're going to do it. Okay. I would just want it to be done by February 6th, because to me, it looks like deception. It looks like you are going to give the public something that you can't deliver.
Was there any question of my position or the position of anybody who won the last election when it comes to ETPA?
Mayor Garrity, with all due respect, for you to even vote for a screen and then turn around and snatch it away on February 6th, that is deception. I don't want to question your integrity right now, but politically, I don't even understand that. You're sending a message. That's why it was hard for us to even talk about the inclusion, diversity, and equity stuff, because you described a communication problem. But if you want to do something about equity, if you want to do something about affordable housing, if you want to do something about inclusionary zone, you do it. You don't set up committees, and you don't sit up here and pull the wool over people's eyes as if you can deliver on something that most likely you can't.
Trustee Bazemore, I will remind you and anybody else who at this hour might still be watching.
They're watching.
We undertook a housing needs assessment in 2017. Our goal was, how can we have more equity and more affordability in our housing, in our community? There was a holistic approach that was recommended. Recommendation number 8, to be taken in order, number 8 of 8 was, do the first 7. If they fail to accomplish your goals, then consider ETPA.
And I'll leave it alone, but in 8 of 8, it clearly stated in words that ETPA is the policy that ensures racial diversity in your community.
I have a better idea.
That's what it
you
says.
got-
Better idea. Excuse me. Can I interrupt? I could actually do this. Do you agree with calling a special meeting on this?
Or a special meeting on this?
2 trustees or more. I could call a special meeting
Absolutely, we could do
Okay.
that.
Special session on what?
on the possibility of the adoption of the resolution and what it means, either passage or non-passage.
It's fine.
You can have a meeting if you want.
You can have a meeting.
Can we schedule a meeting? What's your schedule like?
Need a committee than it currently exists for. That's my position on it. You can call a special meeting,
I did.
and that's fine. You can let us know when it is.
The 18th.
So we'll work with Jamie and Debbie on a special meeting, and then we'll notice it. Well, let's
Friday the 18th?
to be fair. To
Okay.
be fair.
So I don't come on
regardless of-
Friday nights to any
regardless
meetings. Be very aware of
this,
that.
I'm going to be out of town on the 18th.
Let's send out like 4
We don't do
dates.
Friday nights meetings.
Let's send out like 4 dates. Okay. We'll let the public know what dates we offered, and and that way there's full
Very
transparency and accountability. And if we have to host it on our own without an official capacity, then we'll do so here.
So
So.
technically, if it's going to be a special session, 2 members have asked for it. I will call for it. whatever date is appropriate.
Without, no, actually,
And then we have to give
No,
public,
Friday,
we
though.
have to
I don't
give, we have
wanna
to give public
keep
notice.
that.
I'm just letting you know that I don't attend Friday night meetings unless it's some dire emergency that I have to go to.
Do we have 3 people to put this resolution on the agenda for next week?
That would be to you, Manny.
1, 2.
It's interesting. I was part of the first study for an ATP. I was part of the second. No, I was not part of the second study. One of the things that we all, regardless of how we work or we not work together, and we have a different agendas, as some people call it, we all want better our community. We all want, how do we help each other at the end of the day? I was opposed to ETPA. I didn't understand the concept of having, the way I see it is rent control like New York City has. It helps people that some of them, they don't deserve to be helped in a way. That's the way I feel it. It helps a group of people that actually needs to be helped. There's people in the system that take advantage of that. I want to help everybody that actually needs the help. Like some of the people that have been involved in the past, and I've seen in the meetings that I think definitely deserve to be helped. There's people that they don't need the help that they're going to be getting with ETPA. I want to help my community. I want to help everybody on the village of Ossining. I want to integrate what we are, the values that we have, and how do we do that? To me, it was not ETPA, and it's still not ETPA. I want to find solutions for our community. I want to find solutions for the people that need the help as a tenant. So I'm looking forward to find different areas and different avenues to help the people in need that actually deserve the help that we want to provide with something different. Yes, there was a different options back 3 years ago. And some members of the board didn't felt that was needed. There was a study that we did pay $50,000 as a community to solve a lot of the issues that we are still facing. So, I'm in favor of going forward with this, and I'm in favor of looking for solutions for our community to help the members of our community that actually need the help, to deserve the help for everything that we stand for. And I believe, whatever decisions we make on this and whatever decision was made, it was to help that community, our community itself as a whole. So yes, I'm in favor of moving forward this for open for public meeting.
So, it sounds like we have 3 votes to call for public hearing next week. I think the intentions of ETPA are the right intentions for our community, to protect tenants and to keep our community affordable. I've said that all along. It is also a very flawed program. I did not support it last year. I do not support it now. I do support the intentions. And I am very interested in seeing how much we can do with the laws that we're talking about, but more than that, going back to the housing needs assessment. There are a lot of important, much bigger items there that talk about creating mixed income housing in a much more progressive way than has ever happened in this community. And all of that is higher on the list than actually the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan is a multi-year project. We need to get it started because it's going to take a while. But there is a lot that this community needs to do and has to do, and I very much hope we are able to focus our energy on that. All right, do we have a motion to go into executive session for matters related to litigation, real property, and personnel?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. This meeting is adjourned. We will see you next week at the Birdsall-Fagan Police Court facility. We are actually starting at 7 p.m., but with a special program for swearing in and promotion of a police officer. The 16th.
Oh, the 16th.